Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Baltzell. I'm the statewide salmon and steelhead manager for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'd like to welcome everybody today to our 2022-23 forecast kickoff meeting for the North of Falcon process. We've got a pretty full agenda of presentations for you today. I'd like to start off by introducing Director Kelly Suswin and Katie Bizaeva, from the Stillaguamish tribe with some opening remarks for us today.
Thanks, Mark. I'll take a first shot at this. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. We know you're all busy and this is a big commitment of time, but it's the grand launch of this year's Puget Sound fishing season. So we're glad you're here with us. We're going to walk through, as Mark said, pretty much our normal event here. We'll get through the forecast. We'll let our professional staff give you the forecast. I think you'll hear it's a bit of a mixed bag and what we do, how we manage within that mixed bag. Looking forward to it. I know Dr. Litz's presentations are always a highlight for me, so looking forward to that. Big changes for this year really is that we have an agreed to resource management plan with the tribe. So this has been a long time coming, years in the making, 9 months of negotiation with a federal mediator to get there. Hats off to staff who really worked hard to get us there. Feel good about where we landed. Felt like when we hit the finish line, we were more coordinated and aligned with tribes than we've been since I've been here. I think it's a good platform for us to launch into this year's North of Falcon. That said, there's going to be some constraints as usual out there. And I hear that's one of the things I just want to kind of touch on. I hear a lot about people are really hoping, we're going to turn fishing around. And the reality is we'll turn fishing around when we turn recovery around. We're fishing on a listed species. It's declined since listing. We as a society have straightened our rivers, diked our rivers, cut our riparian, eliminated estuaries. We're in a tough spot. We've got 8 million people in the state, more coming. We've got climate that makes our streams more flashy, those now straightened and diked streams more flashy. We really got to turn things around. So that's what I'm going to encourage folks is we will continue to carve out any opportunity we can. We have to put conservation first. Once we've got the conservation in place to where we know we're not going to impact that recovery through fishing, then we can provide some opportunity. This year, the governor took a pretty bold stance at the legislature, rolled out a pretty aggressive package. We've got some good funding coming from that package to help us do all the support work we need to do in order to support these fisheries. The policy angles didn't really fare well in the legislature. We had a few other bills that would do good things, including put salmon recovery right at the ground floor in the Growth Management Act. Those are the kind of places I would encourage folks to learn about and get invested in and try to get a change around there, because we as a society are going to have to turn that around if we want to, one, first and foremost, save these species, and then second, have the opportunity that we all want on them. We're joined today by Katie Bizaeva, a member of the Stillaguamish tribe. Katie's on council and a fish manager there. Katie represented the tribe through the RMP negotiations and will represent the tribe through the North of Falcon. Katie is the kind of person we need in these spots, a young, energetic person that's dedicated and committed to preserving the fish for her people and her culture. So I won't take up any more time. I'll turn it over to you, Katie. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks. I was double muted there for a second. Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for introducing me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie Bizaeva. I am a deputy fisheries manager for the tribe. So I work on a lot of the policy matters, and I also serve my tribe as a councilwoman currently. I just want to put my hands up and say thank you to all the hard work that the state put in throughout the past year and several years, actually working towards an agreed to management unit profile on the Stillaguamish. I know it's not easy, and every year we come into these discussions as a limiting stock, and that's really challenging. Just to talk a little bit about what the Stillaguamish tribe has been doing and is doing to achieve salmon recovery in our watershed. we have limited ourselves to harvest on Chinook to only 5 ceremonial fishers. Those fishers are only going out to provide our entire community with fish and food for our religious and traditional ceremonies each year. We know that we really can't limit ourselves harder. That's challenging. As tribal people, this is part of our culture, but we understand it's part of yours too. We want to see everyone out on the water, whether they're tribal or not. These are natural resources that are invaluable to us, and I'm sure that it's not just limited to tribal culture. Having your kids out on the rivers and ocean waters and harvesting these fish is immensely important. And so we are working towards that in tandem with the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. We also have 2 hatcheries run by the tribe on the Stillaguamish River on our North and South Forks respectively. We are putting out as many fish as infrastructure and habitat capacity can allow right now. We don't feel as though we can really increase production there, because what we're seeing is flooding, riparian areas, and nearshore habitat getting hit really hard each year. And as development increases and urban sprawl grows, our fish are suffering. And so we're working really hard in cooperation with the state to do a lot of recovery projects for our habitat and really change the dynamic a little bit about how we view salmon recovery. We know that harvest limits aren't what we want to see, and hatchery production is a great mechanism to stave off extinction, but really what we need to work towards right now is habitat recovery, and so we are doing that. As we move into these discussions and preseason forecast talks, I just want to reassure everyone that we're working really hard, and we really do want to see us all out there harvesting these fish and having climate resilience and just better habitat for us all. So thank you all.
Thank you, Director and Katie. I think next on the agenda is Eric Netherland from the Governor's Salmon Recovery Office. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Katie, for those opening remarks. So everyone, my name is Eric Netherland, as Mark just said, and I'm the director of the Governor's Salmon Recovery Office. So I first want to thank you for inviting me into your meeting to give a brief overview of salmon. Now, as Kelly mentioned, the expert staff at the Department of Fish and Wildlife will be giving an overview more detailed. So this is more of a global look. Next slide. So why do we care about salmon? And you all know this, especially you all have come here on your own time on a beautiful, partly sunny, mostly cloudy, maybe mostly rainy actually day, but to hear about salmon. So, we all know that salmon form the fabric of the Pacific Northwest. We really cannot have the Northwest without salmon. We have tribal obligations, both treaty and non-treaty tribal obligations, both as a state and as a federal government for salmon recovery. And we know that salmon are critical to our regional and local economies. They're $1 billion industry, and they really support our economy and our actual way of life in a whole host of ways. And we've seen with orca and salmon themselves, with pollution, we know that salmon are indicators of our ecosystem health. So if we can see the salmon to tell what sort of condition our ecosystems are in, and our ecosystems are telling us they need our help. And then finally, if that's not enough, we still have a legal obligation to recover salmon under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So for all these reasons, we have thousands or even tens of thousands of people across the state working to recover salmon. So how are they doing? Well, this chart is from a recent report that my office puts out. It's this State of Salmon report. And what this shows us, and this chart can be found in the report and it can be found online, but what this chart shows us is we have 70% of the endangered or threatened salmon that are in the state that are not keeping pace with recovery or in crisis. So as Kelly indicated, there's a lot of work to do to ensure we have salmon not only on the landscape, but that we have salmon and we're pushing towards recovery so we can have fisheries. And salmon and salmon recovery are limiting fisheries, as we know. Next slide, please. So we have mounting challenges with salmon across the state, and some of these are new and some of these are continuing. One, we have climate change, which is just increasing and exacerbating all of the issues that we've had with salmon. And so this is one of the things that we're really going to have to focus on in the near term and long term if we're going to recover salmon. And these impacts go from the ocean, as Marissa will talk about later today, but they also impact the freshwater streams, and they impact salmon all across their life cycles. Climate change does, from when they're juveniles in the rivers to when they're returning as adults. So we have to get a handle on climate change, and we have to address climate change and the impacts. Population growth, we know we're expected to see our population continue to grow in Washington. And so Kelly mentioned having progress in terms of having salmon incorporated into the GMA, our growth management. We know we have to make progress on protection of habitat in addition to restoration to address population growth. And habitat loss, that's one of the key factors limiting recovery, is habitat. We also have stream flow and temperature, pollution, which is a growing concern, and nutrients, predation, which all of you are very familiar with, but this isn't just pinniped predation. You know, we have ecosystems that are shifting or they're out of balance in many places. So we've got predation of pinnipeds, we have predation with birds, we have predation of fish. So this is a major issue and is really limiting recovery in some places. And then we have barriers, and we have barriers that are blocking habitat, traditionally sort of culverts, but we also have areas that have maybe not seen salmon for almost 100 years, like above Chief Joe or Grand Coulee dams in Northeast Washington. So we're looking, those present challenges for salmon as well. And then we've been chronically underfunding salmon recovery for the last 20 years. So we really need to turn the tide on that. So a lot of challenges and a lot to do. Next slide, please. So if we're going to make progress on salmon recovery, we're at a place where we need to think big, we need to be bold, and we need to work together. And there's really no other way for us to be successful unless we're working together. And so with my office and my team, we work directly and indirectly with treaty and non-treaty tribes across the region. Tribes are paramount to salmon recovery, and they're also leaders in salmon recovery across the state. Tribes have been in the Pacific Northwest since time immemorial, and they really have the expertise, the knowledge, the experience, and they have science that's critical for recovery. So all of us work with the tribes on a daily basis to make progress with recovery. Next slide. In addition, we work directly with our salmon recovery partners that were established in statute probably over 20 years ago, and also were established at the same time that there was the salmon recovery strategy that was put in place. Now, our salmon recovery partners are key. And so with the Salmon Recovery Act, many of you know this, but I'll just go through this briefly. The Salmon Recovery Act put in place the Salmon Recovery Funding Board, and that's a board that distributes both federal and state funding for habitat restoration and protection. The Salmon Recovery Act put into place also regional recovery organizations. And this was very unique and still is unique and considered a model throughout the rest of the nation. You have these regional recovery organizations, and there's a little map on the screen. And they really developed our local salmon recovery plans that were then adopted by our federal government. And these recovery plans still provide a roadmap for recovery. And all of you work with the regional, have worked, I'm sure at one point or another, with the regional recovery organizations. And then the other groups that the statute put in place were the lead entity watershed. So within the recovery organizations, there are smaller watershed groups that really work with the citizens on putting together habitat projects and restoration projects. So I know many of you have also worked, if not with the regional boards, and you've worked with the lead entity watersheds. And then my office was put in place to help coordinate these activities with our state and federal agencies, with the tribes, with our partners, and also look to secure money from our state legislature as well as our congressional delegation. And then, in addition to working with our salmon recovery partners, we work directly with our broader array of partners. So Washington's approach, like I said, to salmon recovery is unique, and it's really seen as a model. So we have thousands of individuals working collectively to recover salmon. And I know this, and I know I've worked with many of you directly, like I said a moment ago. But where we are now is that we really need to grow our base. Now, we need to look for new ways to work together with those of you that have been at the table with salmon recovery. But we also need to find new ways to bring additional people to the table for salmon recovery. People that maybe haven't sat at the salmon recovery table. Maybe you've attended these meetings and you're very interested in salmon season settings, but you haven't really been as interested in coming to the table next door for salmon recovery. So we need this because we really need a broader array of ideas and perspectives. And again, if we're really, the challenges that we face, we are not going to be able to take these on as individual communities working independently. We really have to work together to take on these very large and challenging situations. So if you've already been working on salmon, I just want to thank you. And if not, I really want to invite you in. So in terms of our priorities, the governor just updated the state salmon recovery strategy. And like I said, this strategy was the first of its kind in the nation. And at the time, over 20 years ago, when the statewide strategy was put in place, it was seen as a model. However, it's not been updated since it was put in place over 20 years ago, and it really needs modernized, and it needed modernized and updated. So we've just updated that in 2021, and on the screen you'll see what are the top priorities outlined in the governor's strategy update. And then as part of the strategy update that was completed just at the end of last year, as Kelly said, the governor rolled out $187 million budget and policy proposals that would implement these priorities over the next year. And now the legislature is in the process of finalizing that state budget based on the governor's proposals for salmon. And their work should conclude on or around March 10th. And much of what the governor put in his budget and policy proposals are looking like they're going to make it through the legislature. So we'll have funding, like Kelly said, for the agencies, for Department of Fish and Wildlife, but also for a host of other activities and priorities that align with these priorities on the screen. The other thing is we have an opportunity to make progress on salmon recovery in a way that we haven't probably over the last decade. We have commitment and momentum from the public. We have a commitment and momentum from the governor and our state legislators, as shown in the work that they're doing right now with the budget. We also know that salmon is one of the governor's top priorities and will remain so throughout his rest of his time in office. We have a commitment from our Pacific Northwest congressional delegation. And as you know, there's significant federal funding that will be coming across Washington and the Pacific Northwest over the next 5 years through the Federal Infrastructure and Jobs Act that was just passed, a bipartisan package. So we're looking at billions of dollars coming to Washington that will be invested in habitat, will be invested in correcting barriers, will be invested in updating our stormwater and wastewater infrastructure. So we really have an opportunity that we haven't had in, I'd say, at least over a decade. And so I'll be working with state agencies, I'll be working with tribes, I'll be working with our traditional salmon recovery partners to put priorities into action with this funding. And this morning, I just wanted to invite all of you in to this process and hope that we can continue to work together with those of you that I have worked with, that myself and the salmon recovery community has worked with, but also invite new people to the table as we sort of embark on this next set of priorities over the next few years. So with that, I just want to thank you again for inviting me here, and I look forward to participating in much of your meeting. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. We had a little technical glitch with the unmuting button on this end.
No problem. I was just standing by in case you had to put me on the spot. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for being here this morning, Eric. My name's Kyle Addix. I am the Intergovernmental Salmon Manager for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm just going to run through some of the basics of the North of Falcon process and how we set salmon seasons in Washington. A lot of you have heard this before and know it, but we always have some new faces in the audience as well. So we all refer to North of Falcon. North of Falcon is just the annual cooperative process that we use to set salmon seasons in Washington waters. And the name refers to a point down in Oregon, Cape Falcon, which is really the southern border of Washington's management of salmon stocks. And the North of Falcon process is just one component of a larger salmon season setting process that involves the state, tribal governments, federal regulators, other US states, and Canada. This is just a general timeline of the North of Falcon process. There's a similar timeline on our website that actually includes all of the public meetings that we'll hold this year. But the process kicks off early each year, January, February, as WDFW scientists and tribal scientists develop preseason forecasts, predictions of the number of salmon that we expect to return in the upcoming year. And that's what we're here today to talk about, is all of these forecasts that have been prepared for our 2022 salmon returns. Next week, the Pacific Fishery Management Council will meet, and they will set ocean fishing options for waters off the West Coast from Washington to California. That's sort of the first step in the process, is getting some options on the table for those ocean fisheries. Once those are out there, we start looking at inside fisheries and how we can set seasons, looking at Canadian fisheries, ocean fisheries, and inside Puget Sound, Columbia River, and coastal Washington fisheries that will meet all of our conservation objectives for the year. So we'll have a long string of public meetings over the next month. We'll take comment, written comment through our website on what people would like to see with those seasons. And we'll start to develop draft regulations that reflect the seasons we can put on the water with the forecasted abundances we have this year. In April, the Pacific Fishery Management Council meets again, and they adopt a final ocean fishing package for the year. And at the same time, the state and tribes continue to refine their inside fishing packages, again, to make sure that we will meet all our conservation objectives for the upcoming year. Once we're done with that process, we will submit that fishing package to the National Marine Fisheries Service for their ESA review. Again, we have a number of ESA listed species that we have to pay careful attention to each year. And then we'll begin our formal administrative process, where we actually publish Washington Administrative Code changes and take public comment on those. So we have to weigh a lot of factors when we develop these seasons. I mentioned we have a number of ESA listed species, Puget Sound Chinook, and several stocks and species in the Columbia River that we have to meet all of our ESA constraints for those. We have policies from our Fish and Wildlife Commission that guide us as we set these seasons. So we have to make sure we're adhering to those policies. We have Pacific Salmon Treaty obligations. We have a treaty, the United States and Canada, that sets limit to fisheries in waters off Southeast Alaska, British Columbia, and Washington. We have to make sure we're meeting those obligations. And of course, we have tribal co-management. Our treaty tribes manage their own fisheries, but we manage them cooperatively. We share all of our stock assessment data and catch data, and each year we work to share the harvest between the tribes and the state. And we have an extensive monitoring and evaluation of fisheries statewide. The stock assessment data and data we collect in fisheries is really what drives the whole system, from the preseason forecast to implementing the fisheries and making sure that we're staying within our limits as we implement the fisheries each year. As I mentioned, we have a long string of public meetings coming up over the next month and a half. They actually kicked off last night with our Willapa Grays Harbor forecast meeting. The Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting, as I mentioned, next week, and then a series of meetings for Columbia River areas, Puget Sound, and the coastal areas over the March and into April. I won't read all of these, and they are available on our website at the address listed there. And again, it all wraps up in early April with the second meeting of the Pacific Fishery Management Council, where the ocean seasons are set, and we set the final inside fisheries as well. Again, all of this information you see today, this presentation, recordings of the meetings are available, will be available on the department website. Preseason forecast information, and all of our staff's always available to answer your questions if you give us a call when you start to look at those things. With that, as I mentioned, this is really about the preseason forecasts, and one of the most important pieces of our preseason forecast each year is having an understanding of what's been going on out in the ocean. It really affects survival of our salmon stocks and has a huge impact on what we can expect to see for returns in a given year. And we have Dr. Marisa Litz here, who is going to walk you through the 2022-2023 environmental outlook.
Thank you, Kyle, and I hope I'm coming in clearly on audio.
I can hear you fine.
Perfect. So welcome, everyone, and it's my pleasure to be here to provide context for the forecast you're about to hear this morning, and to provide a more global look at basin-wide conditions that salmon have experienced over the last year and what to expect in the next couple of years. So the outline for this morning's talk, I'm going to give an update on the physical conditions and the outlook for 2022. So this isn't going to include oceanic observations, but also things in the terrestrial system too. So the heat domes, recent flooding, the status of the blobs, and the back-to-back La Niñas that we've had. I'm going to highlight some of the unusual biological responses that we've seen in the ocean to warming trends over the last 5 years. And then I'm going to walk through the Noaa environmental indicator chart. So this is also known as the Stoplight chart, but it's a tool that we use to assess ocean conditions that juvenile salmon that first hit the marine waters experience. And it's a great insight into what we can expect for the next 1 to 3 years. And then lastly, just going to give you a highlight quickly on the 2022 Pan-Pacific Winter High Seas Expedition that I was fortunate to represent the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife on this last month. So take-home messages from my talk: climate variability will continue to impact salmon returns across the state in 2022. And environmental stressors, it's important to remember that they affect both the freshwater and the marine life history stages of salmon. And sort of the note for this year is that cooler conditions related to these back-to-back La Niñas is going to be beneficial for some stocks. Some are still struggling. So next slide, please. So I always like to sort of ground this discussion with an assessment over a really long time period. And this is Noaa's anomaly chart. So kind of it's based at 0, and anything below in blue is departures that are below average, and anything that is in red is above average. So this is a time series of the last 143 years, and it's global land and ocean surface temperatures. So for January 2022, when it was last updated. And what you can see is that those January 22 or 2022 values were among the top 10, 6 warmest in the last 143 years. And what we've seen is that in the last 10 years, we're either in the warmest period or in the top 10 of warmest years. And that this red increase is not going away. In fact, it's increasing steadily through time. So next slide, please. And this not only is important in the ocean, but also in the terrestrial environment. And 2021 was really a prime example of this. So Monday of this week, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their 6th report. And among the thousands and thousands of pages of documents and many conclusions of that work, one of the most important was that climate risks are appearing faster and will get more severe sooner. And so we had, for example, in June of 2021, a once in 1,000-year event. This was a historic heat dome. So this jet stream circulation pattern that was initiated by a term that we've become really familiar with lately, atmospheric rivers, but set up over the Pacific Northwest, leading temperatures to skyrocket over 100 degrees for an extended period of time in Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. This was devastating to returning sockeye in the Columbia River, intertidal organisms, and many other species as well. And then just a flip side of that, just a few short months later, we had this atmospheric river again led to really catastrophic flooding. And not just in November, we had similar events in January. And then this week, we're just transiting out of another atmospheric river flooding event. Some of these are very disruptive to our economy, to our livelihoods, to people's homes. So as well as the salmon, the impact. Next slide, please. And sort of this slide shows the current snowpack. So it is 90 to 100% of normal, and it has been for the last 3 years. And so this is really a transition to what we saw through 2014 through 2015 when we were really experiencing drought conditions. But it doesn't tell the whole story. So while Washington is normal, we have almost all of Oregon and the Southwest in extreme drought conditions. And in 2022, what we're seeing is the Washington State climatologist is telling us that we're having a tale of 2 winters. So while we had these atmospheric events, river events and flooding in January, that followed by nearly a month and a half of drought, very cold and dry conditions. And then we're transiting back into this wet conditions. But these freeze-thaw cycles can be very devastating. They can not only lead to flooding, but also they lead to limitations on the water supply through summer when salmon are rearing in freshwater systems. So next slide. And the outlook in the terrestrial system over the next 3 months is that temperatures and precipitation both are going to be about 30 to 50% either cooler than average in temperature or wetter than average in our region in the Pacific Northwest. But like I noted, that much of the Southwest is going to be experiencing these high temperatures and drought-like conditions, which is not great for aquatic resources. So next slide. And what we've seen in the last 2 years are back-to-back La Niñas. So I have mentioned this in the past, but La Niñas are typically good for Pacific Northwest salmon. They're events that are initiated near the equator, and La Niña in particular is when western winds intensify at the equator, leading to overturning of surface waters and really cool upwelled water. And this affects atmospheric circulation and global weather patterns. So typically during the La Niña, when you have less than 0.5 degrees Celsius sea surface that extend for a 3-month period or longer, you get these variable jet stream that causes wetter, cooler water. I mean, this is what we've been experiencing the last 2 years. But what's interesting is that the flavors of the La Niñas have been a bit different between 2020 and 2021. So in 2020, the cool patch of water was more centralized in the center of the Pacific. And in 2021, it was more centralized in the eastern part along the sort of western border or the western continent. And the result of are kind of really different conditions. So in 2020, we had warmer surface water, 2021, cooler water. And then, of course, the La Nina is opposite of El Nino, which is bad for salmon. We've had, since 2015, we've had 2 El Ninos and 4 La Ninas. So we're really a part of this fluctuating back and forth really year to year, which is difficult to sort of stabilize your conditions over time. All right, next slide. And then what the forecasters tell us is that there's a 77% chance of this La Nina continuing through at least May of this year. So these cooler, wetter conditions projected to continue. Next slide, please. And then in addition to sort of the oceanic El Nino, La Nina patterns that we've been experiencing, there's also been a lot of talk over the last 5-6 years of the warm blob, also known as the marine heat wave. So the heat wave was first identified in 2014. It was initiated by a ridge of high pressure that set itself over the Gulf of Alaska. It was stable. There wasn't a lot of overturn of the water, and we had down to 100 meters, really warm surface temperature water, 3 degrees higher than average. It was the longest and largest event since monitoring for these types of phenomena occurred, so back to 1982. And then this lasted through 2016, and when it dissipated, we didn't talk about it as much. But the fact of the matter is that we've been continuing to have these marine heat wave events in the ocean. In 2019, we had the 3rd largest event. In 2020, the 2nd largest, and at its maximum extent, it was over 9 million kilometers squared, and it persisted until April 2021. And these warm waters, they're unproductive. They're really damaging to the trophic food webs in the ocean. And then the latest one in 2021, it was the 7th largest event recorded. And it began to dissipate and was officially called off by December of 2020. So now we have some pools of warm water, but they're hundreds and hundreds of miles offshore and not in the main area where the salmon are distributed during their winter migration. Next slide, please. So some of the interesting and more unusual biological responses that we've had to the warm ocean just in the last 3 years. So we've had this incidence of subtropical and tropical species showing up off the Pacific Northwest. And this is becoming more and more common that you're getting northerly range expansions of subtropical fish. So bluefin tuna and mahi-mahi off of the Columbia River, fine-scale triggerfish washing up on Long Beach in 2019. In 2020, as the result of the blob in those unproductive waters, there was a collapse of a Pacific cod in the Gulf of Alaska. And also more near shore as a result of these warm waters, a number of these harmful algal blooms, so leading to these closures on account of domoic acid for pseudonychia blooms that affected our crab and our clam fisheries, and more tropical fish showing up in the Pacific Northwest. So off Port Alberni Inlet in British Columbia, we're seeing barracuda and yellowtail. And just the highlight of this is that as these subtropicals move more northerly, they're following sort of a temperature preference area. And that these are not preferential for salmon. These species should not be overlapping. So it's distressing for salmon to see these types of observations. In 2021, despite cooler waters, we were still seeing things like OPA, this one off of Seaside, Oregon. And a recent paper indicated that off Washington, the market squid have increased by almost 40 times over the last 2 decades. And as a result of that June heat wave, billions of organisms died in intertidal zones, both coastally and within Puget Sound. And if you remember back to 2018, I had mentioned observations that there were a lot of crab larvae that were being observed in coastal waters. And that usually was an indication of 3 years later of a crab fishery. And that has proves that these indicators can be useful. So for the first time in over a decade, the Dungeness crab season started on time with high landing. So not all bad news. In 2021, we have transited back into these cooler coastal waters. So next slide, please. And then when it comes to salmon, so 2019, huge Bristol Bay sockeye run. So we're seeing a real difference between these northerly extents of distribution where temperatures are more optimal for salmon, and then off Oregon, Washington, California, British Columbia, where they're not. So lowest returns of sockeye to date at Lake Washington and the Fraser, really poor returns of steelhead. We saw for the first time in 2019, a real tanking of chum and pink in Puget Sound, Fraser, including parts of Southeast Alaska. And yet the highest ever shad returns to Bonneville, an invasive anadromous species. And we still don't have a handle on how shad are impacting as competitors juvenile salmon abundance. Coho was expected to do well because of the improving ocean conditions that started in 2017, but still came in below forecast in 2019. Next slide, please. And then in 2020, again, Bristol Bay sockeye doing just phenomenally despite sort of challenges in the blob conditions that were happening south in the Gulf of Alaska. At the same time, the lowest return of Fraser sockeye. And federal disasters have been announced for many of the Alaskan salmon fisheries, including those in Prince William Sound, the Copper River, Southeast, Norton Sound, and the Yukon River. And an interesting phenomenon for 2020 was that we had the highest Coho jack returns to the Columbia River since 1980. This was really an optimistic signal that these ocean conditions were turning around. We'd have this high run. And it did, but not quite to the extent that was predicted. And there's still many disasters pending from California to Washington, including Puget Sound fisheries and many of tribal origin. So lastly, in 2021, next slide. So Bristol Bay, again, largest run ever at 66 million. And not only that, but we're starting to see a more frequent incident of pink salmon in the Arctic and other species that go along with pink salmon, like salmon sharks, that this northerly migration of salmonid species. Fraser sockeye came in above forecast, which was a good indicator that of the improving ocean conditions. But at the same time, species like steelhead that have a long freshwater residence period in the Columbian state had the lowest returns on record. Already federal disasters have been declared for Yukon salmon fisheries. And for the first time ever, British Columbia closed all of its fisheries for salmon on the central coast. Again, another record amount of shad coming to the Columbia River, and Coho and Oregon County came in strong. Chinook also came in better in 2020 and 2021 than we'd seen in many years. So again, Eric had mentioned this, and Tom will talk a little bit about it too, but really, despite improving ocean conditions, there really is still, salmon are in trouble, to the point where Canadian government has pledged over $650 million in salmon recovery under their Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative. And then more locally at home, the Washington governors pledged nearly $200 million towards the statewide salmon strategy that Eric talked about. So protecting and restoring habitat and investing in clean water, correcting fish passage barriers and building climate resiliency, address issues related to predation in food webs, enhance coordination across agencies, and most importantly for me is to strengthen the science and the monitoring. So the next slide, please. And so here's a look at the Noaa stoplight chart. So For those unfamiliar, pretty straightforward. Green is good, red is bad. Across the top, we have 24 years from 1998 to 2021, corresponding with the years when juvenile salmon head to the ocean to begin their sort of ocean migration that may last anytime from a few months to up to 5-6 years. And it gives you a sense of what these salmon are experienced during a critical period in their life history when mortality can be really high. So that the indicators are split between basin scale physical indices about like the status of La Nina or El Nino, more regional indices like that tell you about sea surface temperature or salinity, and then the biological indices that tell you about the food web and the prey that salmon might be encountering. And what is really exciting about the salmon that entered the ocean of 2021 is that it was the second best year in the 24-year time series. So you have to go back to 2008 to see a better year. And for the first time in almost a decade, there's no red on the Stoplight chart. So what this indicates is that the ocean conditions experienced by salmon as they're out migrating were phenomenal, and they should expect good things in the next year or 2 years. So for my last slide, before I hand it over to the capable hands of Mickey and Kirsten to tell you all about the forecast, I just want to highlight that to learn more about the winter ecology and the oceanographic habitat and the distribution of salmon and the prey that they're encountering, there's been this enormous effort by the North Pacific Anadromous Fish Commission, as well as the Year of the Salmon. And this all culminated in the 2022 Pan-Pacific Winter High Seas Expedition. So it was an incredible coordination between 5 nations. 4 vessels, including a Russian vessel, are currently out to sea. The expedition began in February and it ends at the end of March. I was on the US leg, 1 on the Noaa vessel, the Belém Chamada. Over 60 scientists are involved in data collection. We're identifying or catching and identifying where salmon come from. We're doing eDNA to look at the species composition throughout the North Pacific. We're measuring the water column properties and just learning more and more about this black box in the salmon life history. So it was really a privilege and a pleasure to represent the state in this expedition, and really great things are going to come out of this data set. It's all going to be freely available. And if you want to learn more, check out the yearofthesalmon.org website highlighted. There's ship tracking information, there's updates from the ship, there's videos, so super informative. It was an expedition of the ages. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions before we move on to the forecasts.
And this is a time where anyone, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and we will call on you. You may need to click on the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen, and the raise hand button is there. Oh, I see we have a question from Shannon. Shannon, I have unmuted you.
All right, yeah. Thanks for that, Marissa. Question on the ocean surveys. Where do you see Puget Sound salmon out in those grids you're trawling?
Great question, Shannon. So we haven't analyzed the 2022 data yet, but there were part of similar smaller expeditions in 2019 and 2020, and they caught Puget Sound, Coho, and Chum, and I believe Columbia River Chinook out in the central Gulf of Alaska. So that there was in that figure I showed of the map of distribution, there's a grayed out area, and those were the areas that were sampled in 2019 and 2020. So that grid is much larger. Stations are like 60 nautical miles apart. But it was, I believe, the Coho and the Chinook and the Chum were mostly concentrated in the sort of north or the southwestern part of the grid in 2019.
And that would that be because that's the richest area for feed organisms?
Well, it changes, right? So in 2019 and 2020, that's where they were. And there was also some indication that there was temperature preferences. So they were seeing sockeye that were to the north, and then Coho and Chinook and Chum were further to the south of that grid.
Okay, so last comment and question. The last time I looked at that work, the indication is that the trawl survey was having a hard time finding Puget Sound Chinook out there. Is that correct?
Well, it's, I think that people expected that the salmon catches would be larger than they were. But, that's why they expanded the grid, and there's, multiple nations involved this year. But you're right that there were, and it could be just their relative abundance was low compared to Chum and pink and sockeye that were out in the Gulf of Alaska at the same time.
Right. Okay, thanks.
You bet.
And our next question is from Ron. Ron, I have unmuted you.
You can hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, more so a comment. Can you go back to the ocean conditions color chart, yellow, red, green? I want to make a comment more than anything, as we have so many people that don't dig into what happens with our salmon, and somebody tells them something and it creates this big, I guess you'd say gossip on how our salmon are. I'm from gill nets, and nets have strained our fish down, and our fish are tiny. And this chart says a lot. If you take a look at the yellows and greens, you start in year 2003. There were more 40 and 50 pound kings in that year caught in Westport. Now I'm mainly talking ocean here. We caught so many kings. That was a year we threw 20 and 25 pounders back. But you look at those 4 great years where they fed, and they fed hard, the fish did. Now, the next one was 2011. We had, again, a lot of 30s, 40s, and some 50s again. One day in Westport in 2011, 20 fish over 40 pounds hit the dock on one single day in August. And then it happened again, not quite as big, but in 2014. But you go down those columns and you look to the left at the green and the yellow, what makes big fish is not just the genes, but it's the feed. If they feed strong early on in life and all the way through, they grow big, they grow healthy, and they grow big. This is the actual reason why fish grow and how they get big, is they need to grow and be fed healthy conditions. So I just want people to take a look at that and understand what that chart means, because it says a lot. You look at all those reds from 2015 to 2017, that killed off a lot of fish. And the only thing that came back on up in the Puget Sound we had were, stragglers. Those were the survivors. Most of those fish died. But if you actually just sit down and stare at this chart and you think of the years when you caught a lot of fish, this fits. So they fed strong, and you get into the years where it starts to fade off. They came in, and that was kind of like the last of them. Then the food source starts dying off again. But I just want to make that comment so people can really look at it and understand what it means. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. You nailed it.
And Shannon has his hand back up. Shannon, I have unmuted you.
Yeah, one comment. We saw an interesting thing here in Bellingham Bay for the Nooksack Coho run this year. The fish were bigger by at least upwards of a half a pound. The cohos were bigger, so something's going on there. They're feeding better, I guess. Maybe the freshwater life cycle is better for them, but and larger numbers of escapement. So we're seeing in some of the tributaries that are most important for the Nooksack, we're seeing a higher escapement of wild fish, very encouraging. So I certainly hope that we're entering into a neutral. Do you see a neutral position in the ocean as far as ocean conditions?
So the La Nina is expected to continue through the spring, and that could mean, you know, continuation of these favorable feeding conditions throughout 2022. So we just don't have the foresight to project that far into the future, but certainly through the spring. So we've had, you know, that'll be almost 3 consecutive years of good ocean conditions. You know, like with a backdrop of a lot of this climate, you know, extreme events happening in terrestrial systems, which we don't, you know, can be really devastating as well. So it's only half the story.
Yeah. So then my final comment there is that a lot of our weather is affected by what happens in the South Pacific. Is that correct?
So it's not necessarily the South Pacific, it's the equatorial Pacific. So it's along that equator band from, you know, sort of the South Pacific to South America.
Okay, thank you.
And our next hand is from Dan. Dan, I have unmuted you.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I just had a question about whether the Dungeness crab spawn is still showing up as high as it was a few years ago.
You know, that's a great question, Dan. And I'm not up to date on sort of those observations, but
Okay.
But great question. And usually it's the three year, you know, after those observations that it manifests in the fish.
I'm just more interested here at the fish and lure factory because when the crab spawn's high, we sell more lures of a certain color, and I was hoping to prioritize the paint list. I'm also seeing indications from our commercial troll customers in Oregon and California that anchovies might be abundant. We're selling a lot of colors that they use when anchovies are around.
Yeah, and then, you know, the smelt fishery is opening up tomorrow on the cowlet, so we're seeing high numbers of smelt coming back, or another forage fish like the anchovy.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
And our next question is from Jack. Jack, I have unmuted you. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. Marissa, it's great to see you. I see all those years we saw you up on the Fraser management. You're still doing great things, and thanks for that presentation. I wanted to ask you, every year it seems we started to see this starting to turn a little bit as far as the La Nina a couple of years ago. And I know that you say it looks like this might change, or we would have more that we can predicate that on as of May. It seems every year now, in the last 2 years anyway, that's been kind of the way it is. And then we wind up with seeing at a longer term basis. Is there a difference this year in them picking maybe May as being the change time, or does it look like it's just after all those years of having the bad conditions that they aren't really able to, until we see another year or two this way, to say that in the future we're going to have the La Nina for the rest of another season? Is that why they're careful about it, or is there something developing somewhere else that makes them think through Pacific oscillation or something that this might be gone by the end of the year.
So Jack, great to hear from you. And I miss our conversations up at those Fraser meetings, but a very insightful question. And it's true that the ocean conditions have really been improving since 2017, right? So we've had sort of 4 consecutive years, and the last 2 in particular, where we've seen real improvements. But what the salmon are responding to are these really devastating years from 2014 through 2016, where we had the warm blob, and then these subsequent blobs that we've had throughout the North Pacific. So when you think about species that are really suffering, so some of the sockeye and some of the steelhead, they have these extended marine migration periods. So they're out in the ocean 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So the sort of dramatic declines that you saw through 2019 were the result of those fish experiencing those poor conditions. And we've just started sort of to come out of that in 2020 and 2021. And the expectation is it's going to continue in 2022. But it takes a while for these sort of the ocean conditions to match the life cycle of the fish. So if they experience real hardship early, it's going to take that whole generation to flow through to have recovery. So that's why it's so important to focus, like our director and like Eric was indicating, and Katie as well, is that we all have to work in these freshwater systems at recovery and bolstering the freshwater habitat, where we have more of a handle on the activities that we can do.
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks a lot.
And it looks like that is the end of, oh, we have another hand up just in time. Andrew, I have unmuted you.
Hi, my name is.
Oh, I think there might have been a delay there on that. Unmute and mute. Okay, let's. Andrew, I am trying to unmute you again. I'm not. Oh,
I'm unmuted now.
Perfect.
Yep. Yeah, this is Jessica. I'm using Andrew's account for this one, but I was just wondering about the dam removal on the Nooksack, and I'm just wondering if there's going to be any like stressors on the returning salmon or the out-migrating salmon before we'll see an increase.
An interesting question, and thank you for that. So we've had dam removals in other places like the Elwha. Typically, it doesn't affect the sort of ocean migration phase or the return, but there certainly could be issues with productivity and passage and sedimentation. And there's a slew of researchers and monitoring and dedicated funds to sort of evaluate that as it comes to pass. So thanks for the question.
And it looks like that is the last question for now. If anybody else has a question, you can find the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen under reactions. Kirsten, I think you're ready to go.
All right, thank you so much. So for those who don't know me, I'm Kirsten Simonson. I'm the Puget Sound Recreational Salmon Manager for WDFW, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through some of the forecasts. I'm going to walk through Chinook and Coho before I turn it over to Dr. Mickey Aga to talk about Chum and Sockeye. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with Chinook and moving right into it. Next slide. So just to kind of orient you onto the slide a little bit, this is the historical run size for Chinook in the Puget Sound. You'll see that hatchery stocks are in the darker shading and wild stocks are in the lighter shading. If you look down on the bottom of this figure, you'll see that what we have here kind of towards the left center is the historical 10-year average wild run size from the 10 years before Chinook were ESA listed in 1999. And you'll see that that average is about 64,000 based on the most recent Puget Sound run reconstruction. And if we look at that compared to the most recent 10-year average, you'll see it's about 40,000 wild fish during the last 10-year period on average. And this is a decrease of about 38% from the current 10-year average as compared to that average from the 10 years prior to listing. Next slide, please. So just to orient you to this slide, some of you who have been coming to these meetings will recognize this figure. So what we have here is the stocks around the Puget Sound and the coast. And you'll see that the stoplight charts indicate that the green is anything that is above 25% above the last 10-year average. The blue is neutral. And the red is anything that's 25% or more below the 10-year average. So you'll see that for 2021 fall returns, that the range is from poor to good throughout the Puget Sound. Next slide, please. If we look at the 2022 fall Chinook forecasts, again, the same color scheme throughout the area, you'll see that the range is mostly neutral to good throughout Puget Sound and the coast. The Puget Sound forecast is about 224,000, and that's total Chinook. So if we break that down into hatchery and wild, the most recent forecast has about 25,000 wild, and you'll see how that compares to that 40,000 average from the last 10 years. And so if we look at the coastal forecast, it's about 85,000. And again, I said that most of these are neutral to good throughout the region, but I do want to draw your attention to a couple of different areas. You'll see that the one lone red point on this figure is the Stillaguamish, and we heard from Katie this morning about some of the specific issues with that system. So for those of you who have been paying attention, that's probably not a very big surprise that we're still having low forecasted returns to the Stillaguamish. The other one I want to draw your attention to is right below that in the Snohomish system. It is indicated as blue on this figure. However, I will point out that this is actually a low neutral. So this is another stock that we're going to be keeping an eye on as we go throughout this planting season. Next slide, please. All right, there we go. So if we look more specifically at the recent forecasts for Puget Sound Chinook, you'll see that hatchery stocks. Oh, and just to orient you to this slide a little bit, again, the darker shading is hatchery stocks, the lighter shading is wild stocks, and you'll see the two most recent forecasts in orange on the right-hand side of that figure. So hatchery stocks are up about 6% as compared to the most recent 10-year average, while wild stocks are down about 36% over the most recent 10-year average. And again, that's what I just alluded to in the last figure, that we have a forecasted return of about 25,000 as opposed to the most recent 10-year of about 40,000 for wild stocks. As compared to last year's forecast, hatchery stocks are up about 7% and wild stocks are up about 14% compared to 2021. Next slide, please. If we move out to the coast, we'll see that hatchery stocks are forecasted to be up about 10%, and wild stocks are forecast to be up about 8% over the most recent 10-year average. And if we just compare it to last year, we'll see that hatchery stocks are forecasted to be up about 3%, and wild are pretty much neutral. They're pretty much exactly on par with last year. I think the difference was about 300 fish, so really, really close. All right, next slide, please. So now we're going to move into some of the Coho forecasts. So if we look at the historical run size for Coho in the Puget Sound, you can see that the most recent 10-year average has us at about 455,000, and this is total, so a combination of wild and hatchery stocks. About 455,000 is the most recent 10-year average. Next slide, please. So if we look at the 2021 Coho returns, we could see that the range throughout the Puget Sound and coastal area is mostly neutral to good. I will draw your attention to the one lone spot of red in the South Sound, and that was the Puyallup River that had poor returns for last year. Next slide, please. So if we look at the 2022 forecasts for this coming year, we can see that the range is from poor to good throughout the Puget Sound. It's kind of really a mixed bag. So the total forecasted return is about 666,000 coho, and that's total coho. And we see that the forecast on the coast is about 455,000 coho. So if we kind of look around the area, we'll see that the coast is mostly neutral to good, especially in the South Sound, mid to south coast rather, is looking like good forecasts. And if we look throughout Puget Sound, we could see that North and Central Sound are mostly neutral to good. And I'll point out the couple areas that we're looking at more poor forecasts, and that would be the Strait of Juan de Fuca, Hood Canal, and South Sound. So those are ones that we're going to be keeping an eye on. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we look at this, this is a more recent look at the Puget Sound Coho forecast over the last 10 years. And you'll see that what we have here is that hatchery stocks look to be up about 61% and wild stocks look to be up about 29% over the recent 10-year average. However, I will caution you as to these numbers. You will notice that this 10-year average includes 2015, which was the coho crash, and the subsequent years of poor ocean conditions that Dr. Litz just talked about. So this 10-year forecast includes some pretty poor coho forecasted returns. So while it does say that we're looking to be 61% above that average, I will kind of caveat that with this is more of just a return to normalcy, kind of a rebound from those poor years of coho and poor years of ocean conditions. So we're kind of moving out of that phase now, as Marisa was just speaking to a little while ago. So we're kind of moving more towards this period of rebound from that stage. So there is still some cause for optimism, but I will just caution you with the interpretation of that 61% increase. If we look at more recent history, we could see that hatchery stocks are up about 8%. And wild forecasts are up about 9% as compared to 2021. So again, still some cause for optimism, but just be cautious interpreting those numbers. Next slide, please. And if we move out to the coast, a little bit of the same discussion points here. We see that hatchery stocks are up about 63% forecasted to be, and wild forecasts are up about 45% over the most recent 10-year average. Again, we still have that 2015 poor year and subsequent poor ocean years. So again, this is kind of a rebounding from that. If we look at this just compared to last year, you'll see some pretty dramatic changes. Hatchery forecasts are up about 64%, and the wild forecast is over 2 times what it was last year. So this is pretty exciting news. And you also notice from that stoplight chart that I had up a couple slides ago, all of that green in the mid to south coast is really driving what we're seeing here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mickey Aga to talk about chum and sockeye.
Thank you, Dr. Simonson. Before I start, looks like there's a red line somewhere in the figure. Please ignore that as I go through here. My name is Dr. Mickey Aga. I'm a senior salmon research scientist in fish program at WDFW. And today I'll be giving you all a service level look at Washington State chum and sockeye returns and the 2022 forecast. Now, before I start, I'd like to acknowledge our regional DFW staff and our tribal counterparts for their input and their continued work towards generating forecasts. As many of you know, it's been a challenging stretch in recent years for chum and sockeye populations. I think we've seen some of our most abundant chum and sockeye returns return at historical lows, predominantly due to the anomalous marine climate that is affecting survival that Dr. Marisa Litz walked you through. Now, given these challenges, we've had to adapt as an agency in many ways and increasingly rely on our science division staff to assist with integrating marine climate effects into forecasts and really ensure that everyone that we believe are most realistic projections. So at the end of the day, I want to reinforce that we're using the best available science to inform our understanding of population patterns and projections. So I'll start off with this slide on chum salmon returns, historical to present. And it's a plot of total return chum over time from Puget Sound in blue and the coast in orange and purple. I've included the long-term trend line and recent year average in red, which will help you notice how, over the past 20 years, we've seen our chum returns go from historic highs in the early 2000s to historic lows in the recent decade. And Our recent 10-year averages dropped to 1.32 million, largely due to the returns in 2019 and 2020. Now, last year, I noted in 2019, we had the lowest Puget Sound return since 1979. And fortunately, 2020 and 2021 were a slight improvement. But we're still in the below average low productivity zone for chum in the recent several years, and that's something to pay attention to as we proceed with the next few seasons here. Next slide, please. So let's move on into 2021 fall chum returns. I'll orient you to these trend maps similar to how Dr. Simonson presented Coho and Chinook. And these will be consistent for all species. Again, we color code regional returns based on good, neutral, or poor relative to the 10-year escapement. So this is not total run size. This is just what showed up for the spawning escapement or in our in-season test fisheries abundance estimates for 2021. Essentially a snapshot of how well those returns came back. Now in 2021, fall chum returns were, like I mentioned in the previous slide, still in a low to neutral productivity zone. Much of North Puget Sound and Hood Canal returned poorly as compared to the long-term averages. However, there were some bright spots where we met our conservation goals head on and I think reached escapement goals, particularly South Puget Sound and along the coast. South Puget Sound in particular has seen some rather poor returns over the past several years, but 2021 proved to be a small but promising success towards, I think, recovery goals for the region. And I have a lot to do with the management that we've set forth for fisheries practices in that area. Next slide, please. Now I'll move on to the 2022 fall chum forecast. Along the coast, we're projecting that these populations will remain stable and potentially come in consistent with the 10-year average. In Puget Sound, however, the return is more of a mixed bag. In Hood Canal, we're sitting at 306,000, which is somewhat similar to last year, while South Sound is at 292,000, which is an improvement from the recent few years, but still in the red, so still below that 10-year average. North Sound is a bit of a mixed returns with projected from poor to good down in the Snohomish River system. So a few bright spots, but still again, neutral to poor in that region. Next slide, please. So as we look at how these forecasts compare to the long-term picture, we can see again that the 22 projection is an improvement from 2021. However, it's in the overall picture, chum are still projected to be down 49% on hatchery and 40% down on wild when compared to the 10-year average. So again, still hanging in that low productivity zone since 2018 and for the past several years. Next slide, please. So getting down to the coast, Wildco Bay and Grace Harbor are down 18% from the recent 10-year average. Again, we had a really positive, solid return in 2021. And like I mentioned before, the forecast estimates are more or less in line with that recent 10-year average, but some room for positivity last year with coming back above the forecast. Next slide, please. So now I'll move on to Washington State sockeye. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as many of you are aware, sockeye, similar to chum, have been trending in a negative direction over the most recent few decades. However, the recent rate of decline has been more rapid for sockeye than compared to chum. And I have this trend line in red for the Lake Washington run size, which has been struggling in the recent decade. And while it's cause for concern, we do see some bright spots in the Baker return last year. And I'll sort of cover that in the next few slides here. Next slide, please. So in 2021, sockeye returns were neutral to poor in Puget Sound relative to the 10-year average return. Columbia River populations were neutral to poor. And as you look at a breakdown at the bottom of the slide, you'll see that Wenatchee, Snake, and Yakima populations came in above forecast, but still neutral with relation to the 10-year average, while the Okanagan came in below forecast and was poor return relative to the 10-year. So overall, there were some light at the end of the tunnel for some populations across Washington, as to the fact that sockeye did better than expected, and we really hope that trend continues. Next slide, please. So going forward into 2022, we're projecting Baker sockeye at 27,000 to hit a similar benchmark to what we returned in 2021. However, Lake Washington is projected to return to an all-time low of 10,000. And in Columbia River system, the projections are looking neutral to poor, as Wenatchee, Okanagan, and snake populations are projected to be lower than the 10-year average, while Yakima is projected to return somewhat closer to the average. Next slide, please. So here you'll see the decline in Puget Sound sockeye abundance that we have documented, rather since 2019, but more or less over the past decade. Our forecast in orange shows that we are projecting a run size similar to 2019 and 2020 for the aggregate of Lake Washington Baker. Lake Washington is projected to be down 86% from the 10-year average, while Baker is coming in neutral. And while these forecasts might be on the conservative side, we hope that the sockeye continue to outperform these projections. Now, something to note about Lake Washington, we are further investigating the life cycle survival rates of sockeye from that area, and we are seeing that there is some interesting patterns in freshwater survival, and that's something that we'll continue to explore over the next few years here as to how it relates to long-term population sustainability there. Next slide, please. So moving forward into the Columbia River sockeye, you can see that the projection is coming about 29 to 69% below the 10-year average. Now, this client-based projection is consistent with what we're seeing in other populations, and forecast appears to be well in line with recent year trends. But again, still there in the neutral to poor long-term trend for Columbia. Okay, I think that's all I have. I believe now we'll take a short pause for questions before moving on.
Okay, and this is, we have a hand up from Alex. Alex, I have unmuted you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I have a question in regards to, I believe, Kirsten's presentation there. So historically, I'm curious on what the data would be for when we forecasted or when we saw a neutral return on the Steelhead versus when we forecasted a negative forecast. So I mean, how far back can we see that it actually ended up being a neutral return when we forecasted a negative return?
So that's a good question. I don't have that information in front of me right now, but if you want to send me an email, I can get that information for you and follow up with that. I just don't have the specific year by year returns in front of me right now for each system. If there's somebody else from WDFW that knows that off the top of their heads, maybe they can chime in. If not, then I'd be happy to get that information and follow up with you privately.
Okay, great. And then lastly, so on the charts, you had 2021 numbers still listed. I'm sorry, I'm babysitting. You had 2021 numbers that were listed still as forecast. Has the 2021 numbers not been populated? Has the data not been populated to? If you look on a couple of your slides, the 2021 and the 2022 were in yellow, and then it said forecast over that. So I'm curious if that 2021 data has not been formally populated.
Yeah, so those numbers are still forecast, and then once kind of all the information is aggregated, then those numbers will be finalized. So they're kind of it's still in the works with what all the forecasted numbers that are coming in and all the returns that are coming in. So it's still kind of in flux before those numbers are completely finalized. So yeah, that's why, and it's also kind of to draw attention to the fact that we're comparing with what happened in the most recent history.
Okay, thank you.
And our next question is from Nick. Nick, I have unmuted you.
Good morning, and thank you both for the presentations. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. A question for you on the 2021 Coho. You posted the forecasts, I believe. Is there any information on actual run numbers for 2021, specifically for the Nooksack and the Skagit?
I'm trying to understand exactly what you're asking. So we had the 2021 returns that were posted, and then the full forecast number. Are you looking for specific returns for those two systems?
Yes, what I'm wondering is I'd understood your graph to be charting the forecasts for 2021 on Coho, but are they in fact the actual returns, or do you have any information on the actual returns? And yes, I am specifically asking for those two systems if you have any numbers for that.
So again, I don't have the specific numbers right in front of me, but again, that's something I can follow up with. We just kind of have an overall picture right now, but for specific systems, we'd be happy to get you some numbers if you want to just contact me via email, and we can get those out to you. I just don't have those specific basin by basin numbers in front of me right now.
Okay, so just to clarify, what you showed for 2021 were the forecasts, not the actual returns on Coho, correct?
So the 2021, the stoplight chart was the returns, and then the forecast comparison chart, that bar graph, was the forecast for 2021 and 2022, and then the previous forecasts.
Gotcha. And then Mickey, quick question for you. Do you have any numbers on the Skagit Chum returns for 2021? The actual?
No numbers yet. I know that the escapement was a positive sign, and the Skagit still neutral. As compared to being poor for the past decade or so, but no final numbers there.
And any perspective on how the floods impacted the chum escapement?
Yeah, so floods have had a variable impact on chum escapement throughout Puget Sound. In some lights, it's been positive to get chum upriver, and in other lights, it's been rather poor. So quite variable to say the overall picture for flooding and chum.
Thank you.
And it looks like our next hand is from Shannon. Shannon, I have unmuted you.
Yeah, thanks to the staff for the presentations. And I guess I've got a question for Mickey, and I think the other question would be addressed to Sandy. First, the one for Mickey is that the issue of bass in Lake Washington, that I'm sure that's a big factor. And the other thing I want to mention is the last time we had a commercial fishery for sockeye on Lake Washington sockeye was in 1988, and I participated. And since then, as you well shown by your graphs, that the population of sockeye in Lake Washington has taken a dive. So I wonder, whether we're ever gonna see a recovery on that population. I'm sure the urban and city influence on the lake has a lot to do with it. Water temperatures, predation. And then the other thing I wanted to mention with regard to the Steelhead Wamish, one of the biggest limiting factors to recovery for your Chinook and your chum there is the sea lion population. And they eat a lot of fish. And when we used to fish up in Port Susan years ago, and that's how long I've been involved in it, that whole canal up in there is full of California sea lion, and not to mention the seal population. So at some point in time, the department is going to have to address the issue of sea lion predation on a almost extinct population of king salmon going up the Stille. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Shannon. Next question is from Kurt. Kurt, I have unmuted you.
Thank you. I got a question for Kristen. I noticed in the Wildco Forecast that the smolt to adult survivals for the Snohomish, Still-Squamish areas was amongst the lowest used in Puget Sound. And you made a comment about problems with the Still-Squamish and Snohomish Chinooks. It leads me to ask whether there's a local near marine survival issue in the Port Susan, Port Gardner area?
It's a really good question. And we know that there's a lot of habitat issues in the Stillaguamish in particular, and Katie spoke to that this morning more eloquently than I could right now. So there, we had that discussion earlier about the issues with habitat in the Stillaguamish. For the Snohomish, for Coho in particular, we actually had pretty good returns this past year in 2021. The returns where I think the escapement value was like 95,000, so it was pretty good. We are still in a rebuilding period though for Snohomish Coho, so it's another stock that we're keeping an eye on. We're not quite, there was if you recall, the returns for Snohomish Coho were pretty poor the last several years, so we're in a rebuilding plan. So those numbers are looking more positive, but we're still in that rebuilding plan right now. So I'm not sure about the habitat issues specifically in Port Gardner, but that's kind of the big picture for those two systems.
I'm well aware of the freshwater habitat problems, and looking at the Wildco forecast for 2022, I noticed that the snow stilly, a 4.2% smolted adult survival was used. I think it was 13% on the Skagit, and it was like 8% in most of Central Sound. And that's raised a red flag to me. Is there some local near marine survival issues that we need to be starting to monitor, and on top of the myriad of freshwater problems that we have?
Yeah, it could be there could very well be some localized issues that need to be looked into, and we'll certainly take that into consideration moving forward as we're kind of watching these stocks really carefully.
Kirsten, can I jump in, please?
Absolutely.
Thanks for that, Kurt. And I guess I just want to highlight, in addition to some of the things that were talked about earlier, there is a pretty significant effort across agency, cross discipline effort to look at that area. We have kind of a cross-program team of wildlife, habitat, fish folks, a team of scientists. There's marine mammal and predation sides of it. There's productivity things that we're looking to address. So I think we're basically hitting the ground running, trying to answer some of those questions that you brought up about the basin in there and what's going on. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Mark.
And our next hand is from Andrew. Andrew, I've unmuted you.
Hi, this is Jessica. I just wanted to say the visuals were very easy to understand, so thank you for that. I was wondering about the Hood Canal summer chum, if there's any forecasts for those.
Yes, we have more detailed forecasts available online on our website. I believe Lori Peterson did provide a link in our comment section there. For summer chum, we are looking to be a little bit more on the positive end. It's slightly above the recent 10-year average, and again, we're seeing that earlier timed chum are doing slightly better than the winter chum, or sorry, fall and winter chum. On the opposite end, the winter chum are doing quite poor, and it's something I did not note here, but it's something you can pick up online. Is that the winter chum are at an all-time low projection, closing in on 10,000, which is half of their escapement goal. So again, sort of opposite pictures for winter and fall versus summer.
Thank you.
Okay, and it looks like that is all the hands. If anybody else has a question, raise your hand using the reactions at the bottom of your screen. Okay, Quentin, I think you're ready to go.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Quentin Doherty, and I'm a fish biologist with the Columbia River Management Unit. I will be presenting the Columbia River Chinook, Coho, and Steelhead forecast. Next slide, please. Here we have a time series of historical Columbia River Chinook run sizes from 1970 to 2021. All Chinook returns are to the Columbia River mouth. Fall Chinook are the most abundant, followed by spring and then summer. The trends seen here largely align with ocean conditions across all years. There is variability from year to year, and we appear to be moving out of the low returns observed in 2018 and 2019, but remain well below the large returns occurring from 2013 through 2015. Next slide, please. 2021 spring, summer Chinook returns. As with the previous presentations, the following percentages represented with the colored dots are relative to the recent 10-year average. The green dot represents abundances greater than 125%. The blue dot abundances 75% to 125%. And the red dot represents abundances less than 75%. The percentages shown next to the returns are relative to the recent 10-year average. The lower river spring Chinook are comprised of the Cowlitz, Kalama, Lewis, Willamette, and Sandy tributaries, along with the select areas. The lower river return of nearly 61,000 was about 90% of forecast. Upriver spring Chinook include all tributaries upstream of Bonneville Dam. And summer Chinook include upper Columbia main stem and tributaries. Next slide, please. Here we have the 2022 spring and summer Chinook forecast. About 74,000 lower river and nearly 123,000 upriver spring Chinook and 57,500 summer Chinook. The 2022 forecasts are improved over last year's returns. Next slide, please. Here we have the 2021 fall Chinook returns. Here's a list of the fall Chinook management stocks. Stocks listed above the line return to areas below Bonneville Dam, and those below the line return to the areas above Bonneville Dam. The SAB stock are all hatchery origin and produced for select area terminal fisheries. LRH are a lower river tule stock with both hatchery and wild components. LRW are a wild bright stock that return to the North Fork Lewis and Sandy rivers. These fish exhibit later run timing than other lower river Chinook stocks. LRB are a wild bright stock that return to the Eyes and Pierce Island area just below Bonneville Dam and spawn in the main stem. BPH are an above Bonneville tule stock with both hatchery and wild components. The pub are a bright stock with both hatchery and wild components that return to tributaries between Bonneville Dam and McNary Dam, with the exception of the Deschutes River. URB are a bright stock that return to Hanford Reach, Snake River, and the Deschutes River, which include both hatchery and wild components. The total fall Chinook return in 2021 of about 481,000 was 83% of forecast. Next slide, please. Got it. Here are the 2022 fall Chinook forecasts. And I'll just note the top three here. LRH is 73,000, BPH is about 91,000. These two stocks are important components to ocean fisheries. URB is about 230,000 and contributes significantly to in-river fisheries. And in general, the 2022 fall Chinook forecasts are similar to last year's actual returns. Next slide, please. This slide shows the abundance-based lower Columbia River tule exploitation matrix, which is listed on the left side, and on the right side, a time series of LRH returns from 1980 to 2021. Given the LRH forecast of 73,000, the bold font indicates the allowable lower Columbia River tule exploitation rate of 38% for combined ocean and in-river fisheries for 2022. This allowable exploitation rate is the same as it was for last year. Next slide, please. Here we have the upriver bright abundance base harvest rate schedule associated with the aggregate URV run size and Snake River wild run size, which utilizes the most constraining stock to determine the in-river non-treaty harvest rate within the USV Oregon 2018 through 2027 management agreement. Given the 2022 herb forecast of about 230,000, the Snake River wild forecast of 11,000, the allowable non-treaty harvest rate is 15% for this year. And on the right, we have a time series of the aggregate herb returns from 1980 to 2021. And now for Coho. Next, thanks. This slide illustrates a time series of Columbia River Coho ocean abundances from 1970 to 2021. The darker blue shading are early Coho, which intuitively exhibit earlier run timing compared to the lighter shading of the late Coho. Next slide, please. 2021 Coho returns. Although the 2021 total Coho ocean abundance of about 830,000 was roughly half of forecast, it was still the second best return in the last 10 years. Early Coho represented 70% of the total return. Next slide, please. Oh, which, did you skip one there? Can you go back one? There we go. Thank you. Here are the 2022 Columbia River ocean abundance Coho forecasts, which are double the recent 10-year average. The early Coho forecast of about 593,000 is 102% of last year's return, and the late Coho forecast of 405,000 is 162% of last year's return. The ocean abundance forecast are prior to any fisheries. Make note of that. Next slide, please. This slide details the Lower Columbia natural Coho exploitation rate matrix. Given the marine survival index of 0.31, the allowable exploitation rate for combined ocean and in-river fisheries is 23% for 2022. Slide, steelhead. We include upriver steelhead as part of the North Falcon process because there are ESA management implications concerning these stocks while prosecuting in-river salmon fisheries. Upriver summer steelhead return to areas above Bonneville Dam. Here we have a time series of upriver A index and B index summer steelhead returns from 1970 to 2021. The A index steelhead indicated by the light shading represent the largest portion of the total upriver return and are destined for basins of the mid and upper Columbia and Snake River. These fish are typically one salt. B index steelhead are destined for areas in the Snake Basin. These fish are typically 2 or 3 salt. Next slide, please. The preliminary 2021 A index steelhead return was about 56,000 and the B index was about 11,500. Combined, this is the lowest return on record since 1938 and is largely driven by poor A returns. The B index return came in higher and higher than the low forecast of 7,600. And our 2022 steelhead forecast. The 2022 A index steelhead forecast is 81,000, which is 144% of last year's preliminary return. The B-index steelhead forecast is 15,600, which is 136% of last year's preliminary return. And this concludes the 2022 Columbia River forecast. Questions?
And just a reminder, you can find your raise hand function at the bottom of your screen under the reactions tab. Okay, Kyle, I think you're good to go. Thanks, Quentin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Vandegraff, and I'm in the role of Ocean Fishery Manager.
Hold on a second, Kyle. We just got some late hands, if you don't mind. Sorry.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, first hand is Joel.
Hi, good morning, and sorry, Kyle. I was just wondering if there was any individual forecasts for the upper Columbia Basin Coho that seem to have been doing contributing a lot more lately. Thank you.
I don't have the that portion of the forecast broke out here in front of me. We may have some other staff that are the meeting here that could maybe answer that. I'm not sure if Ryan's there. He is.
Yeah, thanks for the thanks for the question, Joel. All right, so we have to well, we don't traditionally break out forecast individual tributaries for Coho. It's mostly been OPI, Coho Forecast to the ocean. Once we go through the council process, we get a better understanding of what's what hits the river mouth. But so we don't have any specifics. I think we've had some questions recently on what, say, like last year's return looked like. And again, like others said, I probably wasn't prepared for that question. We can look into seeing what, maybe last year was for an example case, given the forecast is relatively similar. But I can circle back up with you, Joel, offline if that's helpful.
No, I was just curious. I'll catch you sometime, Ryan. Thank you. Go ahead, Kyle.
Actually, we have one more hand, and we have Bryce. Bryce, I have unmuted you.
Okay, hello, thanks. I had a little trouble with my mute button. Thanks for the opportunity for this question. I was wondering if the trend in hatchery smolt production for steelhead has been steady throughout the last 10 years or so, or if there's these numbers reflect any reduction in hatchery production. So that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, no, the hatchery production for steelhead has been consistent. I'm not aware of any major reductions or anything like that. If anything, they may have a few more supplementation programs going. So if anything, it might be a little bit more than what it's been over the last, say, 10 years. I mean, not significant, but maybe a few more.
Thank you.
And Quentin, it looks like David Moskowitz doesn't have a mic right now, but he asked the question, can you break down the steelhead numbers by hatchery and the return numbers by hatchery and wild steelhead? Sorry.
Yeah, I don't have that breakdown. Everything's kind of aggregated up to the kind of the forecast and return level, kind of a more high level look at things. So that's a good question. We do have those details, just not right here in front of me. So we could reach out to David and answer those questions, or get the information for him. So
yeah, following up on that, I think Quentin kind of provided some clarity. That information is already broken out. It's on our website. We have our, the spring summer forecast that contains steelhead. And I'm just looking at it for A index total. I haven't done it by subtraction, so you might have to do that. But this year's forecast is a total of 81,000. And of that, 28,100 are wild. So that would be roughly, I'm sorry, my math is a little off, 28,100. So, oh, sorry, calculator. So 52,900 are hatchery, and of the 15,600 bees, 1,900 are wilds. And so that would really leave 13,700 hatchery bees.
Thanks, Ryan.
And it looks like our next question is from John. John, I've unmuted you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I was wondering why we don't have forecasts for sockeye on the Columbia.
Mickey covered that as part of the Chum sockeye presentation that was just before the Columbia River.
Oh, okay. I just tuned in for the Columbia,
Oh.
so I didn't hear that. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if there is no other questions, Kyle, I think you're ready to go.
All right, thank you. Well, if you didn't hear me the first time, I'm Kyle Vandegraff, and I'm in the role of Ocean Fishery Manager with the department. I'm also currently representing WDFW on the Salmon Technical Team and Advisory Committee to the Pacific Fishery Management Council. I'm succeeding the beloved Wendy Beagley, who retired last year, and if anyone's wondering, she's very much enjoying retirement. The Salmon Technical Team, or STT, provides impact assessments relative to ESA and the fishery management plan. I'll be presenting tables 1.1 and 1.2 from the council document Pre-Season Report 1. This is currently being finalized and will be posted pretty soon, actually, hopefully in a few hours. You can find that on pcouncil.org. And on behalf of the STT, I'd like to thank all state and tribal staff for their contributions to this document. We very much appreciate it, appreciate all your work. All data in these tables are preliminary. I'll touch on forecasts of interest primarily to the ocean fisheries as we go through these slides. Okay, starting with table 1.1. This is the Chinook forecast table. Sacramento River Fall Chinook forecast is 396,500, which is higher than 2021. This stock contributes to fisheries up and down the coast. The Klamath River Fall Chinook remain designated in overfish status. The forecast of 200,100 is a little bit above last year's forecast. And moving on down to the Columbia River Chinook stocks. Quentin did an excellent job of covering the Columbia River already, so I won't add much here. I will just reiterate the 38% total allowable exploitation rate on lower Columbia Tule Chinook has been a consistent constraint for ocean fisheries. So that's definitely something that will be taken into consideration this year. Maybe leave that up there for, I guess, yeah, let's move on to page 2. Washington coastal Chinook stocks don't play a significant role in ocean fisheries. Overall, their forecasts in 2022 are pretty similar to 2021. Okay, and moving right along to page 3, Puget Sound Chinook stocks are not typically impacted heavily by Washington ocean fisheries. but can be a management consideration as all fishing areas contribute to achieving conservation objectives. As ocean fisheries are being planned, these stocks can play key roles in fishery shaping. Okay, and I'll head over to table 1-2 to talk about some coho. Starting with the Oregon Production Index area that consists of all those stocks, coho stocks south of Cape Falcon. The 2022 forecast is 1,225,900. That is smaller than last year's forecast, but that's still a good forecast, and that should provide ocean coho fishing opportunity. The Columbia River earlies and lates are the hatchery runs that make up the majority of that forecast. This year's forecast for those stocks are most similar to 2019 forecasts in my view, and those contribute heavily to ocean recreational fisheries as well. Lower Columbia River coho, or LCNs, are forecasted for 65,700. So that is a bit of an error there, or it's been updated since these slides were made. So I apologize for that. And as Quentin mentioned, the allowable exploitation rate this year on LCN coho is 23%. That is down from a 30% allowable last year. Oregon Coast Naturals, or OCNs, are also well up from last year with a forecast of 222,400. The allowable exploitation rate is 15%, and that's equal to last year. On to the coast. As mentioned earlier today, there's some positive forecast news for most coastal coho stocks, some of which have been constraining for ocean fisheries in recent years. And I will highlight one. I'll highlight Queets Natural Coho, which are designated in overfish status and have been a pivotal stock when structuring ocean fisheries. The forecast of 18,200 is well above recent years, which is very good to see. Okay, and on to page 2, the final page here. We'll talk some Puget Sound coho, most of which are not drivers for ocean fisheries, but are significant to planning of inside and terminal fisheries. I'll focus on a few of those that are notable. Starting with Strait of Juan de Fuca Natural Coho, those are designated in overfish status. The 2022 forecast of 7,300 is just above last year, but pretty similar to recent years. The Snohomish Natural Coho forecast of 64,200 is slightly above last year's forecast. Snohomish coho are now designated as not overfished, rebuilding. And Hood Canal Natural Coho have been designated as overfish status in 2022. The forecast is for 20,200, which is down from last year and the lowest forecast in this time series. So that's all I have for today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kyle. And it looks like we have a hand up from phone number ending in 126. I've asked you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a question about the ocean coho. Are we taking a look into the mortality rates on a mark select coho fishery in the ocean? And do you have the mortality rate percentage?
We do publish a mark selected fishery report. Those have just been posted up through 2020 on the WDFW website. They're somewhat easily to search for. I think you can type in the year and then selective report, and those should pop up. And we're working on 2021, and we consistently put those out from year to year, and it should have quite a bit of information that you're looking for.
But do you have the mortality on wild coho personally? Do you know what it is?
Oh, do I know it offhand? There's no, on releases, we assume we do have some assumptions built into our fishery structure, but I don't know the actual mortalities offhand.
Okay, because last night I was told it's 14% in the estuary, so I was just trying to see if it's higher or lower than that in the ocean.
As far as a release mortality rate for recreational ocean fisheries, that's consistent. It is 14%.
In the ocean. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And the next question we have is from Shannon.
Yeah, could you go back to the Chinook plate page? Now, my question is specific to the return to Samish and Nooksack regarding the fall run. And I'm trying to read your, it's awfully small here. So I'm seeing, what am I seeing here? Oh, that's East Sound. Okay, I'm seeing 28.1, that's in thousands, 28,000s.
Right, that's correct. Yeah, 28,100.
Okay, so, you know, I ask this question every year. Is that a pre-terminal run estimate? And if it's not, what are we looking at here locally? We're at the end of the line here, okay? So do we have any idea what's going to show up in Samish with that number I see there? Thanks.
Well,
What's
I'd
the
like to help you
difference
out.
there? Pre-terminal and terminal. What's the story there?
Well, I don't think I know that particular stock well enough to answer. Perhaps there'd be an area biologist that worked on the forecast directly that would want to get you an answer or follow up afterward.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.
Yeah, apologies.
Hey, Shannon. I can say that on these forecasts here, they represent terminal run size. So when we're looking at Nooksack Samish there, that does represent what's returning to the terminal area. That's escapement plus terminal area harvest, which would include 7 BCD net.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and it looks like if nobody has any other questions, remember your raise hand is at the bottom of your screen under the reactions tab, or you can raise your hand on the phone by dialing *9. Oh, and we have a hand from Alex. I have unmuted you.
Awesome, thank you. Kind of a follow-up on the Samish terminal fishery. When we go back to that slide, I think it says 28,000 forecasted for this year on the Samish fishery. And then I look at 2021 and I think it says 18. Are those forecast numbers? Do we know what was the final number for the Samish and Nooksack terminal? Do we know what we received back on 2021?
I could take that if you want, Kyle. So thanks for that question, Alex. So no, we don't have a final escapement estimate yet for 2021. Those things usually take some time to compile all the information and work with the scientists and co-managers to make sure we have that best estimate. So those usually don't happen. I think it depends on species. But those usually don't come in till later on in the year where we start getting those escapements for 2021.
Okay, do we have any estimates if that number was greater than the 18,000 that was forecasted?
So I'm not sure that we have any local biologists on the call right now, but we'd be happy to get your info, or you can contact me or Kirsten at the agency, and we can try to connect you with those biologists.
Do we use the data of 2021 to set the 2022 seasons? Because if we don't have it populated yet, how would we use that in correlation with our current season setting process?
Well, so we use previous year escapements and forecasts, and we also take fisheries information into account too. So we also have hatchery rack returns, but again, all that information is preliminary and not final yet.
Okay, so we're not going to use 2021 as hard data for the 2022 season setting process. Okay. Thank you.
And it looks like Shannon has his hand back up. Shannon, I have unmuted you.
Yeah, I could probably answer part of that question. What I do know is that Samish surplus 9,700 Chinook. So that tells me they got what they needed. The question is what did they do with the surplus? Thank you.
And Edward Eliezer, I have allowed you to unmute.
Thanks, Shannon. The surplus went to food banks, and is interesting, a good portion of that 9,700 Chinook that came back to Salmonish was 3-year-old males. And so we're looking into that as well. But all the surplus was utilized, and we're hoping for another solid return this year. Thank you.
Okay, and that looks like the end of the questions for right now.
So Leah, should I start?
Yeah, you're good to go, Tom.
Good. Well, good morning, everyone. Tom McBride, I'm the legislative director here at Fish and Wildlife. I think you've all been at it for a couple hours, so I'm going to try to focus this up and make it interesting for you. One big caution right before we start, legislature's not final yet. So either on policy bills or on budget, some things are pretty certain, but nothing's final. So I just want to caveat, I will update this whole presentation. If somebody wants it later, when it is finalized, I'm happy to give it to you, but please don't take these numbers or things as final. Next slide, please. So just a little brief presentation on policy bills that the agency's been involved with. I'm only going to mention 3 of these for this group, unless you have questions. 1626, this is our statutory authority to go to electronic licenses where you'll be able to put your license on your phone, move away from having a physical license required on your person. We waited till Oregon worked through some kinks and got some information from Alaska, and so I think we're ready to go forward. So I think that's going to be fun. 1508, kind of a related fishery. This is the domoic acid issue that delayed the Dungeness crab fishery on the coast in 2020. This is rulemaking authority for health. Nice thing about crab, unlike clams or mussels, is the domoic acid resides in the guts, in the butter. And if you eviscerate them, the meat can be safe to consume. That's a $40+ million industry on the coast, probably another 40 million between tribal and non-tribal in Puget Sound. So having an option other than full closure is a good idea. And then 1931, this is a hydropower fee. This is for when new permits are requested. It allows us to go in along with ecology and argue for fish passage and water quality issues. So those 3 bills seemed relevant. Next slide, please. All right, first I'm going to talk about capital. It'll be pretty quick, and then we'll go into operating budget. Next slide. All right, so this is what I expect to happen in the capital budget. With this group, I'm just going to mention the first 3 and the last 3. The first one there, Deschutes Watershed Center Hatchery. This is the Deschutes down here that comes through Olympia and dumps into the bottom of the sound. This is for South Puget Sound Chinook production. It's for designing the construction of a full hatchery, not just a collection and assimilation place. This is for the water permits and lining up the land. And so we're kind of on track for that one. The Toutle River Fish Collection Facility, for those of you in that area, Sediments filling up behind that structure faster than expected. So this is allowing us to purchase some real estate and easements to make sure that we can keep that sediment from spilling over into the river downstream. Beaver Creek Hatchery needs to be renovated. This is going to replace the Grays River Hatchery. The Army Corps of Engineers is not going to allow more dredging on the Grays River, and we're going to have water collection issues on the Grays River Hatchery that we can't surmount. So Beaver Creek will be the replacement there. Skipping down, Grand Ronde fishing access. So this is the Grand Ronde River that comes up out of Oregon, flips into Washington and drops back out. We have an access spot there. There's some controversy with private landowners. This is a pot of money to see if we can find better access. If we can't, we return the $500,000 and just try to make the current situation work. Indian Creek fish screen removal. This is up on the Olympic Peninsula near Lake Sutherland. It's an old fish screen for a water diversion that's not used anymore, but that concrete has to be removed. It's starting to hook up logs and cause some flooding problems. And then the last piece was a little bit of a surprise to us. This was put into our budget. It's $3 million. It's just as a pass-through to the Kalama Creek Hatchery, which is with the Nisqually tribe. So next slide, please. A big item that's being negotiated between the Senate and the House right now is the Duckabush River Estuary Restoration. It involves moving Highway 101 upstream and then bridging over the river and allowing that estuary to kind of braid out and be a little bit healthier environment. The Senate put $50 million to move the highway, build the bridge, restore the estuary into RCO's budget. It's not in the House budget. So we'll see what happens with that, but just be aware there's a possibility. This is part of a three-part project that the federal government authorized in 2016. Duckabush is the first one. The next two parts of it involve the Skagit River and the North Fork of the Nooksack. And it's 65% federal money, 35% state over the combination of all three projects. So kind of a big deal if we can crack this one open and start to get out some of that federal restoration money. Next slide, please. I just wanted to throw this on before we talked about what's going on in the operating budget. As you'll see, state general fund at $177 million, 34% of the agency's budget. I expect after this that number is going to go up substantially and that percentage will go up substantially. And I think we all just need to be aware that the state general fund is picking up a bigger share of everything we do. And so next slide, please. So I did this in three parts. This first slide I'm going to talk about is what we originally proposed to OFM and the governor's office for submitting to the legislature in 2022. The next slide I'll talk about some restricted funding ideas we had. And then the third slide is going to be the governor decided to push on salmon recovery. And so added a bunch of provisos and ideas. Some of them overlap with what I'm going to talk about right now, but that's why it'll be in three parts. That first piece, freshwater monitoring, that's to just improve our data on the Puget Sound and on the coast, surveying and sampling. I noticed that I think it was Kurt Kramer asked a question about better data on freshwater monitoring, and Mark Baltzell weighed in on that. This piece is tied to it, and we'll get to, there's another piece coming on freshwater monitoring on the two slides down. Forage fish spawning monitoring. We've got some long-term data going. It's good not to gap that up. We use those WCC crews to find out where spawning is going on, what time of year. This is your herring, sand lance, smelt, anchovy. Sometimes prey for salmon, sometimes kind of a buffer to keep salmon from being prey. Solar expansion, not really for this meeting. Just so you know, though, there's 33 projects proposed. It's about 70 square miles. And unfortunately, it seems like everybody wants to stick it right in the middle of kind of shrub steppe. And kind of we're recommending Why don't you put it in some old beat up industrial area that doesn't have any habitat plus? Building salmon team capacity. You all know we've had some retirements of some key people. We need to start building backup staff. This is also to help us do quicker modeling returns on north of Falcon. So it's just some money to beef up our kind of data and response team. Upper Columbia River reintroduction. This was a request from the Upper Columbia United Tribes. So that's, I guess, the Colville, the Kalispell, the Spokane. And this is for reintroduction on the Upper Columbia. It's $3 million. It's really a pass-through for us. It's probably for trucking and those costs. We've asked for a sentence to be included on this money that there needs to be pathogen testing and appropriate marking. And I'm hoping that'll get included. The next two, increased recreation needs, lands maintenance backlog. That's just us trying to be a little better neighbor, better signage, keep the bathrooms cleaned up, make the roads passable. Fish passage rulemaking. This is your water diversions and barriers. This isn't kind of the HPA permit, new construction stuff. This is working with private landowners on existing issues and problems. And the number 9, land use support. There wasn't a lot done on policy around land use and salmon recovery. This is a request for us to go in and work with the Growth Management Act. King County, Pierce County, Snohomish County, and Kitsap County are all going to redo their comprehensive land use plans in 2024. That's the first, second, third, and 7th largest counties by population in the state. So that's more than half the state's population. And if we don't get in there and start pushing kind of some of the decisions to be made to benefit salmon, we're going to have a tough time with recovery. You all probably heard about, the press covered the numbers coming out of the Lummi Sea Pond of European green crab, in excess of 80,000 trapped. This is an issue that's not just in the Puget Sound, but also on the coast. But that was a good opportunity to get an emergency declaration from the governor. And then both budgets include $8.4 million to go forward. And, eradication is probably not really on the table. It's not realistic, but trapping can keep this population under control from doing too much damage. It seems like we've had some success doing that up at Drayton Harbor. So I expect that's going to go through for sure. Next slide. So this slide I broke out because these are all pots of money that come from what's called a dedicated fund, where legislature said, we're going to collect this money, but it can only be spent for purpose X or Y. I'm only going to talk to you about the first 3. If any of you are bird hunters or want to talk about the last 5, you can email me or text me. Hatchery production and compliance. This is to make sure we've got our permits in order at our hatcheries. And it's also to staff our auto trailers for marking full time. The Puget Sound Recreational Shellfish Harvest Assessment. This is for both doing a better job of monitoring that harvest, but also when we have like a high temperature event, doing some research about whether we lost out or not. Number 13, improve recreation management. This is like those lands management provisos before. This is just out of our dedicated Discover Pass funds. We get 8% of the Discover Pass. This is really going to focus on water access sites, and it's going to be signs and toilets, which don't sound very sexy, but they're pretty darn important when you need one. Can we go to the next slide? All right, so this is interesting. After we had submitted our supplemental budget, there was this effort to do something more from the Governor's Office on Salmon Recovery. And these are the pieces that I think might survive into our budget that were proposed from the Governor's office. So that first one, Marine Fisheries Compliance Liaison Federal. This is just basically for a person that's going to try to coordinate our efforts, the federal efforts, the tribal law enforcement efforts, and have it be a little more seamless, a little better. As we go down the list, you'll notice there's also more enforcement officers and also some funding for some assistant attorney generals to make sure we get environmental prosecution. The second item right there, enhanced freshwater monitoring. So that was something we had proposed for the coast and Puget Sound. This probably has a little bit more of a focus on North Puget Sound, say including the Nooksack, but more and better monitoring. As things get tighter, you all know we need better data. Enhanced ocean salmon monitoring, look for that to be implemented probably at Ilwaco, Westport, Neah Bay. Increased monitoring of Puget Sound recreational marine salmon. This is just more money for monitoring. As the numbers get a little bit lower and things get a little tighter, we got more of a burden under the ESA to provide to NMFS and Noaa. Enhancing commercial salmon monitoring. This is going to be a commercial enforcement boat. And also there was a question earlier by someone. This is a little bit heavy focus on chum and monitoring that. Fisheries enforcement compliance, that's 15 new Fish and Wildlife officers. The implement electronic license and catch record cards. This is just about getting that data sooner. That'll be better. The FERC licensing participation, that kind of ties into that bill I told you about on the hydropower fee. This really is about making sure that as these dams get relicensed, that there's fish passage and water quality is sufficient. The productivity piece of monitoring, fish in, fish out, there's the FIFO reference. We're just looking for what's the baseline data, what are the barriers. I think this probably focuses a little bit on the green, the Stillaguamish and the Ho in terms of collecting data. The statewide hatchery monitoring and evaluation program, based on something we've done successfully in Eastern Washington, it looks at kind of survival and timing, and we're kind of looking for those pinch points of what's going wrong, either on the fish going out or the fish coming back, and identify where the problem is and what we can do. Environmental prosecution, like I said, that's 4 assistant attorney generals to handle prosecution on these cases from our increased enforcement presence. Prioritization plan for fish passage barrier. This doesn't impact what DOT's doing in the federal court injunction area. This is about everything outside of that injunction area or between those culverts and the saltwater that we need to prioritize to make sure we actually, we open up actual habitat, not just potential habitat. This will run through the Brian Abbott Fish Barrier Removal Board if some of you are familiar with them. The increased shellfish monitoring, that's for both recreational and commercial catch. And then the final issue, the gillnet buyout. The Senate has $14.4 million for a Columbia River license, and it's not in the House budget. And I would tell you if I knew what's going to happen, but I don't know what's going to happen with that. So let's go next slide. So you'll see we're in March. The legislature finishes with policy bills today. They've been meeting to reconcile their 2 budgets. They'll do that over this weekend, and sometime next week, we'll see a final product. And I know I went really fast. Go ahead and skip to the questions slide. If there's questions about anything I talked about or anything I didn't talk about, I'm happy to jump in. And I hope that was helpful.
Okay, it looks like we have a question from Bob Kehoe.
Hey, Tom, you're a real professional. You've been doing this for a while. I can tell. Hey, I had a question on the Columbia River gillnet bill, and or not on the bill, on the budget proviso, which, as I understand it, would basically eliminate the commercial gillnet fishery on the Columbia River. Is that correct? Or at least the gillnet aspect of it.
So you know, it's interesting, Bob. I think, and this is my opinion, so don't assign it to anybody else. I think that's the intent of the proposal. When you look at the amount of money and how it would spread out over the 240 some licenses that are available. But it's a voluntary buyback program, so it doesn't necessarily do that. It's not a gear ban, which is, you know, like with pound nets, you can go into statute and say, so I think your sense is correct that that's an intent. I worry a little bit about when there's an intention, but it's not clearly reflected in the language, whether there's disappointment down the line. But yeah, just looking at how big that chunk of money is, it looks like a kind of more than a inactive license buyback.
Yeah, okay, good. Just a quick follow-up. Has WDFW staff and policy folks consulted with the Senate and the governor's office on kind of how this would actually play out? I mean, how could this even be implemented? I'm just kind of thinking, how this would work on our Columbia River and with our friendly neighbors to the south. How in the heck would this even be coordinated? Just curious if you've had those conversations with the Senate and the governor's office on this budget proviso.
Yeah, Bob, we put together a proviso that was more of a phased approach and looked more at inactive licenses at the start. And a lot of the supporting documentation of that walked through how you work with Oregon. They have fall zones 4 and 5 commercial gill netting by rule. There's the safe area issue. But that wasn't accepted by the governor's office, which is certainly the governor's office right to do. And they went a different direction. So I think we provided all that information, but we weren't actively involved in, I think, the negotiations in the governor's office and maybe the Senate.
Thank you. And it looks like our next question is from Commissioner Anderson. I have asked you to unmute.
Oh, thanks very much, Leah, and thanks very much to all of the department and tribal staff who contributed information and to those of you that provided the presentations here this morning. Very, very well done and very informative. I wasn't going to say anything, but I just was struck by Tom's slide that had the proportion of the department's budget that is and the amount coming from the state general fund. And then thinking, and to just put that into some context for people that may not remember, and I believe in 2008, we had a contribution of $110 million that came from the state general fund in a biennium. Shortly after, I think, December of 2008, when we went into the financial crisis, the department's general fund contribution was cut from 110 down to something like 60 million. And to see that number in your graph today, Tom, that I think was around 170 million, just made me think what a great job the department's done in working with the legislature and in making people realize that the work that all of you do is so important to the general public, beyond the people who fish and hunt, and all the work that you do with land and conservation. So I just viewed that as a really positive statement. There's I think a very positive policy statement there. There's a recognition by the legislature of the work you do and how it affects the broader population within Washington. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for that.
And our next question is from Shannon. Shannon, I have unmuted you.
Yeah, Tom, good job on your overview of important issues that we need to be aware of. On your original plate that had to do with legislation or acts that the department wants to take, it talked about the repeal of 1172. Real quick on that. What is that?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. 1172 strikes some statutory language. So this is from an initiative back in 1986. And the parts of the language that just aren't good law are the statute said that treaty rights were expired upon the 1913 Citizenship Act for the United States. And that also stated that the state manages the resources, solely manages the resources, which we all know after Bolt and kind of the acceptance of for fisheries, a co-management role. It's just inaccurate language. That bill doesn't actually operationally change anything that's going on in terms of management, but the language just sits there. It's not in compliance with where the federal case law is. And so that would just, it's an AGO request that strikes that language. We know it's not operative language, so we support it. I think sometimes a bill like that has trouble getting through because when the legislature gets really busy, they're like, well, we don't really have to do this. Yeah, we want to get rid of it at some point, but it's not operational. So I hope it goes through at some point. I'm a little concerned because today's cut off, whether it goes all the way to the finish line. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so then this, thanks for that. Yeah, it needs to go away. So a little follow-up on Bob Keogh's discussion about the Columbia River. It sounds really confusing as to how you're even going to implement this, but if it actually goes to the governor's desk. But the question I have, which I think is really important, is how do you factor in Initiative 77 that the voters of Washington State approved?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Shannon. It's this issue. I'm not the longest served around here, but it's been a hot topic from the day I walked in the front door and still ongoing. It's a frustrating issue for me because I sometimes feel like I'm trying to crack a code about what people are talking about either what they're for or what they're not for. And so all I know is that there's language coming out of the Senate that could go. There was no language in the House, so maybe nothing happens, or maybe there's some hybrid in the middle. So I just call it 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And I know that's not a good answer to your question, but I just don't have anything great for you.
Yeah, thanks on that. The fear is that if that pushes through, that'll put fish traps back in Puget Sound, and we do not want that. Thanks on that, Tom.
Thanks, Jen.
And our next question is from Alex. Alex, I have unmuted you.
Thank you again. Curious, Tom, on the figures for the hatchery funding, what does that compare to previous? So that's for 2023. So how does that compare to 2022's budget and also 2021's budget?
So are you looking at on the capital or?
That last slide that you had listed, and it said, I think it said hatchery monitoring and.
Oh, the hatchery production and compliance, that little bit of 574.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just 574,000 to we need to get some permits done, and we need to, what we discovered with COVID was it was a lot easier to staff the auto trailers than manual, which wasn't very reliable for us, so to move over. So that doesn't really change it one way or the other. Our hatchery production, post the southern resident killer whale push, there was about 26 million of increased production. About 18 of that was our production. There was another 8 that was tribal production. That was one-time money to the tribes last year. The legislature made it ongoing. So I'm a little more familiar with the production. The total numbers, I assume, for our hatcheries in terms of support and capital are probably pretty level from last year to this year, but I'm not sure I'm answering exactly your question.
I mean, yeah, you mostly are. I'm just curious if we're seeing an incline or an increase, a decrease, or neutrality on what our hatchery funding is right now.
That's a great question. I'm going to give you a answer that's worth what you're paying for it, because it's just my opinion. I feel like we're in kind of a lull right now where we had that increase, and now there's a little bit of a feeling of what are we doing? Are we going up more? Are we staying level? Do we want to move stuff around a little bit? That there's smarter people than me that know the answer to that, but that's how it feels to me right now.
Okay. And then on the 2023 numbers that you had listed there, is that my understanding is the Lorraine Loomis Act didn't go to the floor for voting. Is any of those funding numbers going to be altered, or do they account for the Lorraine Loomis Act? Is that going to be completely separate? Do they change, or how does that populate with those numbers?
Great question, Alex. So the Lorraine Loomis Act, which was going to put more of a regulatory emphasis on riparian zones, it included about $8 million to implement. That was close to us. That's not in this materials because that bill did fail to move forward, so it's not going to pass the legislature. So these numbers are already adjusted for that bill not moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Alex. And looks like our last question is from Steve. Steve, I have unmuted you.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, I mean, clearly a lot of hard work to try to balance multiple imperatives, priorities. But one thing specific thing that I didn't see that's been mentioned elsewhere in the conversation today is pinniped predation. Any sort of action or budget line associated to that. Is that buried in there somewhere and just not obvious at the top line?
Yeah, good question, Steve. As I think you know, we were able to get that expanded permit down on the Columbia River for sea lions, Stellar in California. As far as Puget Sound goes, we do actually have some budget now to do some diet studies and looking at maybe some pinch points. I don't think the legislature has any type of appetite for any type of general cull on the Puget Sound for seals or sea lions, but I do think we should develop the data about do we have some spots that are particularly devastating, and get some diet data and that type of thing, which would be necessary to take any action down the road anyway, but also maybe we'll learn what we got out there. So there is money in our budget to pursue that. We got it last year, and we're working on that study.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. It looks like Morgan, you're ready to go.
I am. Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Morgan Carlson. I'm the Habitat Program Director here at the department. I'm really happy to be here this morning. You know, I've worked for the department for just about 20 years, and we continue to make increases and improvements in our integration between habitat work, fisheries work, both here in the department with partners and also with our tribal co-managers. And so I'm really pleased to be able to be here. Thanks to you also for spending your time. I know I have the unenviable position of speaking now, and it's getting close to lunch and we've been at it for a while. So I hope you will be patient at least and be a little excited about this too. Kelly, Katie, and Eric have already spoken this morning about the importance of recovering salmon and the role of habitat. Marisa and others have given examples of, you know, the big ocean environmental condition changes that we've seen historically and more recently. If you've been to one of these kickoff meetings before, which I assume many of you have, you'll recognize the slides actually that I'm going to be speaking to from today. As I talked with others inside the department and thought about today, we consciously chose to keep the same slides because really the heart of our messages and our strategy to address habitat concerns hasn't changed. I'm going to review those habitat concerns and what we think needs to be done today, hopefully build on others' remarks, and hopefully make it different than last year by being able to prompt a little bit of discussion about what's going on and what we still hope to do. Next slide. So the wild and hatchery fish, as you all know, the wild and hatchery fish that we all care about here depend on certain watershed conditions. So it was awesome seeing Marisa's slide. She shows you great data about the trends in the ocean-related metrics. Noaa has also published a summary beginning in 1996 describing what kind of properly functioning watershed conditions what those look like in order to achieve and sustain salmon recovery. And while I don't have a simple table today summarizing all the data relative to those metrics historically and currently, we do know that many of those metrics aren't there. They're not properly functioning. Freshwater temperatures aren't cooling. There are very few places, if any, that get removed from state and federal lists of temperature impaired streams. We know that impervious surfaces in watersheds are still increasing in many places, which results in some of the things that Director Suzwin talked about: flashy runoff, reduced ability of floodplains to store and sort of slowly let out fresh, cool water. And we're seeing many more places experience drought-related conditions, including low flows, while on the other hand, winter flows are increasing. And if we go to the next slide, our vision in 1996, as Noaa compiled the science around properly functioning watershed conditions, it didn't even at that time include an understanding of climate change and its effects on these watersheds and on the biology. Climate change has effects on ambient temperatures, the air temperatures, but also on weather patterns and severity. And these exacerbate many watershed conditions. So an example of the multiple relationships at play here is we know we're seeing smaller Chinook and Coho sizes, and that those smaller fish produce fewer eggs and they dig shallower redds. Those redds are more easily washed away by the more frequent or intense floods that we're seeing. And the fish that do survive have to contend with lower flows, hotter flows in the summertime. We're measuring these types of changes right now. And you might even, be able to see some of these very things in your backyard or in the places that you're at. And I know there's at least one of you here joining the meeting today who's really looked into that, for example, in the Stillaguamish watershed. Next slide. So while there's quite a list of properly functioning watershed metrics, and of course, each watershed has a unique mix of both historical and current practices affecting these conditions, I'm focusing here today on land use because all of these metrics are affected in one way or another by the patterns of human uses and development on the landscape. In some ways, Washington's ahead of other places and other states because we have the Growth Management Act, which gives cities and counties the authority and responsibility to govern development moving forward. But that Growth Management Act, or GMA, only addresses new development and activities. And the considerations and the protections that it does provide for habitat are really limited primarily to narrowly delineated critical areas. That's a little bit like recognizing we all want to eat a chocolate chip. We and salmon depend on a whole chocolate chip cookie, but we're really just preserving the chocolate chips in there. We do have an organized and committed salmon recovery network that's looking at some of the impacts from historic practices or legacy impacts, but it too has really been underfunded, even relative to the impacts and restoration that we identified in the early 2000s that was needed. So really the bottom line here is we know that this existing system isn't resulting in properly functioning watershed conditions. And we know that human population growth in Washington state continues to hit and surpass the high estimates projected by the Office of Financial Management. So what we take away from that is that without really adequately both protecting the habitat functions that we have remaining, even our existing sophisticated restoration investments essentially run the risk of becoming a large mitigation program for the ongoing development that we know is happening in Washington state. And that's not the model we're seeking. So if you go ahead and go to the next slide, and this is where I want to hang for a while and hopefully have some time still for your questions and discussion. Don't hear me saying restoration isn't important. Restoration continues to be key. And I mentioned we have only partially funded the restoration investments that we identified beginning in the early 2000s that are needed. And that's a clear and compelling ask both from Salmon Recovery Office, the Salmon Recovery Network, and the Governor's Office keyed into that this year. So restoration continues to be key. And WDFW has important roles along with our tribal co-managers and our other restoration partners. WDFW conducts restoration on public lands. We pass through restoration and restoration-related science grants to other people. We fund and conduct some of that science. And really importantly, we work with landowners to increase their willingness to engage in voluntary restoration on their property. That willingness is really key. But the point I was making earlier is that that is not enough if we don't fundamentally revision how Washington grows, develops, and redevelops our landscape to remedy some of those legacy impacts. We have to develop differently. We have to see the ways that habitat and green space benefit people and they benefit our quality of life, as well as some of these goals that we have for habitat for fish and wildlife over time. And we have to protect those habitats and green spaces. We have to ask more of our land use system to restore some of the large impacts that happened before we had regulations in place. The strategies on this slide, and I wasn't planning necessarily to walk through each of those, and I'm especially not going to do that right now. I'd like to let your comments and your questions guide our discussion. But the strategies on this slide build on WDFW's strategic goal to not just protect the habitat that we have today, but to seek strategic gains in our habitat and our environmental function. We want to see Washington's land use system reflect this idea too, and include accountability for progress toward all those properly functioning watershed conditions that salmon need. We know that WDFW is underfunded even for existing roles in influencing the land use system. And we also need to play a role in increased accountability for the land use system, whether it's what we have today or hopefully an enhanced and changed revisioned land use system. We need to play a part in increasing accountability. So think back to that awesome table that Marisa was able to show you that summarized and brought focus to ocean conditions, how those are today, that status, but also what the trends have been leading up to today. And I really appreciated, I think it might've been Ron Garner who drew us back to that and showed us and pointed out how powerful it is to be able to see and relate those changes over time to the conditions that we observe in our day-to-day lives engaging with salmon. We need capacity here at WDFW to pull together the data streams for those similar metrics in the freshwater watershed situation relative to those properly functioning watershed condition metrics. And we need to be able to fill in the gaps with our own habitat monitoring programs. You see there on the slide, certainly tribal, state, and local governments have to continue coming together. But the big pitch I want to make today is that we need you to pull it off too. Elected leaders in the legislature and the local governments are really the ones with the decision-making power over our land use system at both the state and the local levels. And one of the things that we consistently hear is that a lack of public will, a lack of public engagement is a barrier to them making the tough choices to make change in our laws and our policies. So while there have been certainly some small wins in particular places or with funding some work, and I really appreciate Tom doing such an excellent job outlining some of the particular funding wins that we've made recently, a lack of public will and support, as I said, is nearly always a barrier. And it takes time and persistence to make the kind of change that I'm suggesting, revisioning our land use system and building on it so that we're not satisfied with the way we're trying to achieve no net loss of what we have today, but really fully understanding no net loss in the context of climate change and ongoing growth, and also making sure that we're not forgetting the responsibility collectively and of government to look at those legacy impacts that are remaining today. And so, I really want to call out, I know there's at least a couple of folks who are on this call today who showed up to some of the legislative hearings regarding riparian protection and restoration. And I didn't want to go any farther without shouting out a big thank you to all of you. Now we've got to figure out how to bring more people into that fold and to see your powerful presence as citizens and people who are clearly so knowledgeable about salmon and about what you see both in terms of the trends data we're talking about today, but in your day-to-day activities in your lives related to fisheries. We need to figure out how to magnify that powerful presence into more of the decision-making around these issues and more policy and law changes that address all of the properly functioning watershed conditions that salmon need. I would be really excited to hear your feedback about what we can do to help you and support you to get engaged in that way, and hopefully hear from you some of those barriers and how WDFW might be able to address those. I know that's fast, and as I said, that's on purpose to hopefully have time for questions and your observations, because this isn't the first time we've talked about this topic. But please, thank you. Go ahead and move to the last slide. Thanks for your time and attention. And with the time we have left, I would love to talk with you about how we help grow and advance a conversation about change, certainly relative to land use and relative to the ways that WDFW is supported to engage in that system. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. And to remind everybody, *9 on your phone to raise your hand, and the reaction tab at the bottom of your screen. It looks like we have a question from Bob Kratzer. Bob, I've unmuted you.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm curious, is there a list somewhere that you have that would list all the habitat areas and things you've noticed and where we need that for, like, all around the state, like for each river system or so forth? So I'm out here on the coast. So what do we do out here on the coast? Because obviously our habitat is going to be way different than what you have in the Puget Sound and other places. So where do I find a list of what we can do for habitat restoration out here on the peninsula?
Fantastic question. The first place that I would point you to showed up in my presentation, and that's the 2020 State of Our Watersheds that's produced by, that's primarily, again, Western Washington, that's produced by Western Washington Treaty Tribes, I believe. But that's a starting place. We're also working on, we have a powerful tool. So as you can imagine, it's hard to summarize really broadly landscape scale changes and where there remains habitat to be protected and where we might need to see restoration. WDFW is pioneering one of the techniques to use technology to use high resolution satellite data so that we're able to actually do that from offices, right? And bring you all as real-time data as we can about where we still see habitat, vegetated cover, complex river systems, and where we can tell that that's been converted to something else. And we call that our high resolution change detection data. Right now, so I will have to follow up and we'll get a link posted so you can see what we do have available on the web. But right now we're funding that work. Largely, it's kind of like the MacGyver, chewing gum, paperclip, and some duct tape. We're funding that right now largely through one-time grants that last a couple years at a time. And so one of the things that we're working on is trying to get funding through the legislature to actually institutionalize that and fill in the gaps statewide so that we can have you a better and more timely answer and point to the place online where we can have those summary statistics. One of the things that, in addition to that we're working on is making sure that our habitat program has the capacity needed to pull together the data streams that right now are in a lot of different places. Tribal co-managers, federal partners, other state agencies have a lot of individual data streams, sometimes not even available online, that can inform those properly functioning watershed condition the metrics that I mentioned. And so that's another thing that we're advocating for that we don't have right now, is having the capacity in the department to pull together those data layers and also have the capacity then to synthesize them in the way similar to the way that Marisa showed you that table, again, to inform the conversation exactly as you're saying. Okay, where do we have it? Where don't we? And what can we tell about the drivers? Right now, what we're relying on to inform those local conversations about what do we need to advocate for is really primarily our limited habitat presence on the ground in our regional areas and our engagement with local governments, as well as with tribal co-managers and partners. So it's kind of an unsatisfying answer, but I think it illustrates how underfunded WDFW has been to bring the kind of comprehensive look and strategy that you're rightfully asking for.
Thank you.
And it looks like our next question is from Joel. Joel, I have unmuted you.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Morgan. You spoke passionately about the frustrations you've had or the recognition you have of the need to make salmon habitat or just habitat in general more present in the mind of legislators. And one of the things I noticed when we were listening in on the hearings for the Lorraine Loomis bill was the opposition from people who basically didn't see salmon as their problem. And I just wanted to call out that there recently was published a paper, and a lot of the contributors were from Noaa Fisheries Science Center's cross-sectoral externalities related to natural resources and ecosystem services, where they start to look at ways of solving the problem of varied uses of habitat resources that are not related to, say, salmon, and getting everybody together. I haven't even read the whole paper yet, but it seems that, and this is just a big comment, the WDF&W sadly needs to employ sociologists to study the culture of the problem so that it's possible to communicate why salmon are everybody else's problem, rather than just continuing to say habitat metrics, et cetera, which, you know, I value that conversation, but that conversation isn't reaching across the cultures that are causing those degradation of the habitat metrics. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Joel, thank you so much for that comment, and thanks for your consistent engagement in some of these legislative issues. I think I can speak on behalf of the whole department in saying we couldn't agree with you more. And I apologize if you can hear that helicopter flying over my house. Jeff Davis and I have long looked at exactly what you're saying and the need to use human dimension science. So we're talking about psychology, sociology, the study of behavior change, to help develop our strategy about helping people understand that conservation is a people problem that we're not separated from. And we've made a few gains in that way, but we have a long way to go. As an agency, we are actually getting ready to hire a human dimension scientist to help lead a new unit that would strategize exactly along the lines of what you're talking about and have tactics and tools in place. Another thing that we're doing is we've recently partnered with an eco-psychologist and an ecologist at the University of Washington who are really leading the way in an incredible new area of work. It's called Nature and Human Health. And it's all about exactly what we're talking about, Joel, that there are benefits to people, human health, mental health, and also reductions in things like crime, temperatures we experience in cities, all connected to green space that can also have habitat value. And so we're trying to explore what are people's motivators for caring about and being engaged in even urban and suburban green spaces, and how can we use that to build conservation value and ethics and behaviors. And then finally, it's another reason why we work so hard to advocate for our statewide regional-based capacity for habitat program, because one of the things that we've found is we are vastly more successful in changing some of the hearts and minds of individual landowners and also of the local governments making those land use decisions when we have WDFW staff present with those people all along the way in their planning and then their execution of their land use ordinances. So thanks for drawing a highlight to that issue.
And our next question is from Alan. Alan, I have unmuted you.
Yes, good morning. Thanks, Morgan. The truth of the matter is that it's all connected. My concerns are basically related to the fact that trying to save natural processes everywhere all the time does not focus on those processes which are most necessary for salmon productivity, that there are many things that can limit salmon production, but if it could be prioritized specifically and lines drawn on a map, you'd be better in a position to channel development into areas. And in listening to the discussion about the riparian recommendations, in placing a prescription that is ideal, it's nonsensical in those areas where it is just never going to be possible, like cities, Seattle, things of that sort, ports that have been developed. If you set realistic targets, you can then focus the public will more on things that will likely show a difference. And showing a difference will get more people in line. So the department could work with the co-managers to identify corridors and characteristics within corridors that are perhaps achievable, but that means you can't have everything everywhere all the time. You've got to sacrifice, in the best professional judgment, those things that are set aside in the larger public interest, but still will support the salmon productivity with its needs. Thank you.
Absolutely, Alan. And I thanks for those comments. You've long been kind of a voice for practicality and reason and making meaningful progress. And I appreciate that. I think that there are a couple of things leading towards what you're saying. And I think your comments really build on that first question about, okay, point us to the places, where's the map that shows us what we need to protect and what we really need to advocate for. In addition to some of the answers and kind of work that I pointed out that I think will help us get there, some of the discussions about riparian ecosystems this session, as challenging as they were, are hopefully going to lead to some funding from the legislature to do exactly what you're talking about relative to identifying the most important places to go first to make that, proverbial biggest bang for the buck. And similarly, I think that capacity I was mentioning to be able to essentially do the analysis you're talking about, do it quickly and with best professional judgment, and then work with tribal co-managers to do that and then make it available to people is absolutely central to the work. We're also working to try to update the science in NOAA's 1996 properly functioning watershed conditions metrics so that we can build in considerations like climate change, where are we seeing low flows, to get us to the thing I heard you say, Alan, which is what matters the most. All these different factors that might affect salmon aren't all equal in their effect. So what are the ones that have the biggest effect? So thanks for that.
Thank you, Alan. And our next question is from Shannon. Shannon, I have unmuted you.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. Yeah, so I just kind of want to follow up on Alan's discussion. The declining wild salmon populations in Puget Sound and statewide are the canary in the mine shaft. And so thinking about that and the last effect of the 100 years of footprint here in the Northwest, we do need to be looking at the growth management acts statewide, and Alan's suggestion about identifying those corridors, best bang for your buck, I think is very important. The other thing I wanted to mention is how people from the ground level can get involved, the grassroots thing. And that's your working with your conservation districts. That's where you're gonna get a benefit. And then also with your regional enhancement groups, you know, turn the television off, get out of the house on the weekend, grab a shovel and get with it, you know? That's a part of the Northwest, getting outside and enjoying what we got. So with that, I think there's a lot that that citizens can do and get some exercise, get involved with your conservation district, and for sure, get involved with your regional enhancement groups and talk to city government. Okay, bye now.
Well said. I can't even add. Thank you, Shannon.
And the next question is from Kurt. Kurt, I have unmuted you.
Thank you, and thank you for this discussion. And Shannon and Alan were right on the money that we need to, you know, the salmon are more, you know, we're all widely concerned about salmon, but they're more important to society as a whole than just how we value them. And somehow we have to get public buy-in at a broad level on how this canary aspect of our salmon. And so we have to figure out a way to communicate with a much broader public, and we need to figure out how to communicate in language that they can understand. Most of us are pretty conversant in conservation issues here, and some of these discussions are pretty tough for us to even to follow. And we need to figure out a way to simplify our discussions and get to the very germane pieces of them in as simple 4-letter, 5-letter words, 2-syllable words that folks can understand, and get the hell away from all the buzzwords and things that we all continue to fall into to move forward. And, you know, the other thing we've done in our salmon recovery is, you know, back in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, all those involved in the salmon recovery, including myself, fell in love with this concept of property function conditions. And, you know, and the goal of restoring our populations to 60% of our historic abundance is a wonderful goal. So by doing that, we bought into some really big items that are absolutely essential to get there, but somehow we forgot to take a close look at some of the production bottlenecks that are limiting our abilities to take care of or advantage of the big items we've tried to restore. And we need to have more of a two-pronged approach with addressing long-term objectives with short-term objectives of widening these bottlenecks so we get more fish out of the limiting factors. Again, thank you.
Is it okay if I ask a follow-up? Is there an
Sure.
example of kind of the maybe bigger scale, that second prong, the bottlenecks? Are you thinking of physical bottlenecks, like noticing where we've sort of channelized and levied rivers and taken away floodplain, or is there a broader thing you're thinking about when you say that?
A classic example would be, let's say the Snoqualmie River, where we put a lot of effort into restoring estuaries and those kinds of things to take advantage of additional rearing. But if we can't get the eggs out of the gravel, we have no fish to put in the estuary habitats. So it's nice to have the estuaries. It's absolutely essential if we're going to get to some of these big long-term objectives. But to have successes and begin using that, we got to figure out how to get better egg to migrant survivals and better in-river rearing so that some of the migrants are less dependent on that. And right now, you know, in the case of the Snoqualmie, you look at the decreasing fecundity, decreasing marine survivals, decreasing freshwater survivals. And a female Chinook spawning in the Snoqualmie River right now cannot replace herself in all but just a very small percentage of the very best conditions. And until we can change that so they actually can produce something, you know, where the rest of it just becomes, you know, spinning our wheels. And if we could get some of those bottlenecks opened up, then we'd be able to demonstrate more benefits in some of those big items. We'd actually get more fish using some of those more bigger items and begin building some momentum and success. But more importantly, we have to figure out a way to convince somebody in downtown Seattle why salmon is important to the bigger picture to them, and why it's worth them to pay $10 a month more for their power from the Skagit projects or whatever it may be. We have to, and we've got, you know, that's got to be the three-prong approach, I think.
Well said.
Okay, thank you. And we are running a little bit behind. So we have time for a couple more questions and then we're gonna take a quick break so we can get sorted into breakout rooms. Our next question is from John. John, I have unmuted you.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just bringing up some common sense things. We're all on the same thoughts, but we have to have some common sense also. I was looking at this year's House Bill 1117 as an example, and it is the latest attempt to add salmon recovery to the Growth Management Act and would require county planners to adopt a strategy where any new public construction must meet an undefined net ecological gain called NEG standard, where the bill says that projects on private land are not required to meet NEG. It does declare that any projects funded with public dollars are required to meet this high standard. So conservation projects, which is really important stuff on private land, funded with public dollars would have to meet the NEG requirement under that bill. This would lead many farmers to walk away from the conservation programs due to the new requirements. So this is gains we've made over years of people trying to work together to get here. Please note that the bill does not define NEG, but leaves it up to the Department of the Fish and Game and to adopt rules creating a definition that will affect landowners statewide. The impact of this bill and others like 1838, the mandatory buffer bill, and so no farmers or ag groups have been allowed to provide input to the bill, and none of this concerns have been addressed. And I'm just thinking, these are the things that hold us apart from getting this momentum rolling to make the corrections. And I was wondering, do you or the game department ever talk about these things that are going on in the legislature? As far as, are the ideas coming out of the game department, or where do they get these ideas? Do you know?
Well, I certainly can't speak for legislators. House Bill 1117 is one that was created and advanced by Representative Luckanoff. It is officially dead. So I think the good news is that I think we all have an opportunity to stay engaged and address exactly some of the points that you're making. I do know a little bit about House Bill 1117, and the department often has opportunities through testimony or providing, staff work to legislative committees or legislators. And some of the very concerns that you are raising in terms of effects on agricultural lands was part of the discussion that I'm aware of. And I'm aware of a number of different changes in the case of that particular bill that were made over time to really avoid those kind of effects. For example, making sure that agricultural lands engaged in the voluntary stewardship program would have been exempted from that bill. Or I think there was a change late in legislative session before the bill died to have the gain parts of the bill apply only to publicly owned projects. And so that important point that you're making about unintended consequences from public funding was struck from the bill. Nevertheless, I think I can fairly say that WDFW has always been and is committed to keep working this through, because like some of your colleagues here on the meeting have said, we have to get people engaged and being willing to support change and hopefully avoid unintended consequences along the way, or where change is agreed it needs to happen, how do we help people do that, help them make that moving forward. Hopefully, does that help, John?
Yes, thank you.
And it looks like our last question is from Sandy. Sandy, I have unmuted you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I just want to follow up on some of the comments made by Kurt Kramer, specifically related to the Stillaguamish watershed. First of all, I'd like to say I'm from the Evergreen Fly Fishing Club, and we've been members of the Stillaguamish Watershed Council since its inception. And we are big supporters of habitat improvement in the Stillaguamish watershed. And I'm especially glad to see Katie on board here, because it's good to see a member of the Stillaguamish tribe hear a lot of this discussion. And even though there's been a lot of good work has been pointed out, improving some estuary areas on the Stillaguamish, and also we see a lot of good work from the Stillaguamish tribe in the riparian areas, specifically on the North Fork, buying up land areas and putting in large woody debris. But what we talk about in our conservation committee on the Evergreen Fly Fishing Club, we talk about taking a holistic approach to the Stillaguamish watershed. We feel that that's a unique watershed. Now, why is it unique? Well, a couple of reasons. One, it's low level elevation. Gets rain, it doesn't get a lot of snowpack, and it has a lot of unstable land up there. You know, it's not just the issue of the recent Oso slide. You look at the LiDAR maps of that watershed over the last 10,000 years, there's been one slide after another. So when you have an area that's the combination of a low level watershed, a lot of unstable land, we need to look at more than just the lower level riparian areas. We need to consider the entire watershed and make the upper watershed off limits forever to logging. You know, you look at the owners of that watershed, it's either U.S. Forest Service, the state, or Weyerhaeuser in terms of that upper watershed land. And, you know, I've heard like somebody from the DNR will respond, oh, we haven't logged in that area in 20 years. Well, that's not a good enough answer. You need to make that entire area off limit to logging, because you look at the land use designation up there, it's logging. That means it could be logged tomorrow or next week or next year. So you know, the state needs to purchase land from Weyerhaeuser to get it out of logging forever, and the DNR needs to commit to never log that land. So again, when you look at the unique aspects of the Stillaguamish watershed, the fact that it's lower level elevation, the fact that there's still going to be logging allowed up in unstable areas that would decimate some of these streams like Deer Creek and others that feed into the North Fork of the Stille, we need to protect that entire watershed. And again, also you heard others mention the canary in the coal mine. If there's a canary in the coal mine here, it is the endangered Chinook run on the Stillaguamish system that impacts other freshwater fisheries and the marine fisheries out in Puget Sound. So for all of those reasons, you put all that together, we have to especially protect the watershed of the Stillaguamish River system. And Morgan, I appreciate the opportunity to provide this input. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy, and thanks for your longtime service on the Watershed Council as well.
Okay, thank you, Morgan. I think now we are going to move into our breakout sessions. So those of you that registered before about 8:30 this morning will be pre-sorted into rooms. The rest of you, I will have to manually sort. So after you get into your breakout rooms, you can take a 20-minute break, and then we will get started. I will open the rooms now.